Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with...
This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Still very little progress on my apartment. 4 different insurance companies are behind the scenes all figuring out who pays for what. So, that just speeds the whole process along. Just lickety split. So much for me as the owner to do. So this is what we've got. We're stuck with the bad headset audio quality. We're stuck with the essentially nothing to show on YouTube except the occasional pictures and our lower third. But there you go. That's what's going on. And as far as what was watched this week, for me, exceedingly little. My mom had the everything to do with Queen Elizabeth II's funeral services going on. So that was
I
was
forgot
pretty much,
you people care about that stuff.
That was pretty much just on entire time. My parents and I started watching the Orville from the beginning because they've never seen it, and I quite enjoyed it. And I warned them that the first season is a little bit uneven and a little bit crude in the humor in places and that, but it's a show that definitely gets better and better, and they have enjoyed it right from the beginning. So I think there is only good
something
things
about your
to
parents' sense of humor, it sounds like to me.
There you go. I mean, it's not too bad. It was network TV, so it's not like it's horrific or anything like that, but, it was what it was.
It certainly isn't where he would have done if given his druthers.
Sure. And I guess the other thing I should mention is last week when I mentioned that we all had the sniffles over here, it was COVID.
There you go. Welcome to the club.
It was no positive test back then, but afterwards, I mean, this was just the rapid test that we took. My dad definitely had it, for sure had it. Thankfully, never got too sick. He was feeling pretty darn crummy for one day.
That's kind of how it goes when you've been vaccinated.
Yep, vaccinated and boosted as much as we possibly can be here. And then, just continues to have some congestion. The worst I had was a little bit of congestion, which is why I really didn't think I had it. And my rapid test showed like the faintest of little lines on the T line. So I mean, it makes sense. I've been around my parents. Somehow, my mom has never had any symptoms and never tested positive. And, once my dad and I knew that we had it, we were masked up and everything, but it's not like we were quarantining before that. So how my mom managed to avoid getting it, I have no idea. But this has happened in other households where people have had it and one person out of the group somehow never tests positive and never has symptoms. So I'm very glad for that.
My family did that twice. Twice.
Yeah.
So my wife and I got it, none of the kids did. Then one of my sons got it, and now the 2 kids didn't. And then the 2 other sons had it together.
It's bizarre stuff. But yeah, this is my first time testing positive for it. Doesn't mean I've never had it before, because
that is true as well.
Who knows what was going on. But yeah, there we go. Turns out it really was that. Tom's joke was prescient and knew what the future would be.
I spoke it into existence. Sorry about that,
I blame you now, Tom. I never thought of that before, but now I do.
You can. I take full responsibility for that. And as my punishment, I went and got my eyes checked last week for the first time in 35 years.
It's too bad we don't have video. It's too bad.
These are just readers. I've been wearing these for about a week and a half because I've been complaining about my low light vision. You guys have heard that on this podcast before. I've been complaining about my low light vision. And so I finally said, it's getting like I'm having a hard time. I need really bright light to see really small things.
Right.
So I need really bright light to see very small things. I'm like, okay, this is clearly an issue. So I went into the optometrist or ophthalmologist. I don't remember. I guess optometrist probably. And they did the whole kit and caboodle. Got my eyes dilated and all that other stuff. And they were like, yeah, your vision's really bad. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I've had, the last time I got my eyes checked was just 35 years ago, granted. They were like, your vision is better than 2020. That's your, and to this day, I'm driving around, I can read signs my wife can't read, no problem.
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, oh yeah, even your distance vision needs pretty heavy correction.
Oh,
I'm like,
all right.
What are you talking about? So right now I am wearing, and I'm not going to keep them on because I don't need, I guess I'm maybe it takes my eyes a second after I've been wearing the readers to readjust to not having the readers on. Everything looks blurry for a bit.
Yeah.
But I've got I went in and ordered some glasses yesterday, and they're progressives, and they're the whole kit and caboodle.
Gotcha.
So the next time you see me, if you ever do see me on this podcast again, I will be wearing glasses and feeling exceedingly old. I cannot tell you the hit my ego took when I was like, I convinced myself, I was like, I'm never getting glasses. My vision's better than 20/20. I can read signs. My wife has asked me what that sign says our entire marriage. It's never
does
not
she
been
wear
the case.
Glasses? Because
She doesn't.
I mean, I'm
But
thinking.
she has her eyes. She's had her eyes tested,
Uh-huh.
and they're like, your vision's, your far vision is fine. You just need readers. So she wears readers.
Huh.
So
All right.
I apparently can correct. My brain corrects for it or whatever.
Sure.
Anyways,
I mean, for
so,
me, being a person who's worn glasses ever since I was a kid, I don't associate glasses with old age, so that doesn't.
I do. Thank you very much. So there you go. You see, you got COVID, and I got
Right.
I got to age about 20 years in my own mind in one afternoon. Like my eyes were still dilated. They were like trying to get me to try on glasses to pick out which ones I wanted. I was like, listen, I have not processed this yet.
Yeah.
I need a drink. And you guys aren't offering me that. I'm going home. You got to stop talking to me.
I love when I'm trying to pick out new frames, and it's like, well, the frames I'm trying on don't have prescription lenses in them. So good luck to me seeing what the hell I look like in the mirror. I have to get myself right up close, and then you can't see the whole face because I got terrible vision. So, yeah.
So mine's not really that bad. I mean, I can drive around without glasses on, and I actually can watch TV and everything else. It's just if I'm wearing the glasses, everything gets a lot clearer. Like I didn't realize it wasn't clear. And we're going to talk about this more on the podcast as we go forward, okay? Because this is going to be one of those experiences that hits home how hard it is to not know what you do not know.
All of a sudden, Tom wants a 4K. Tom wants an 8K display now. That's what's going to happen because of these glasses.
Shut up! I want all the pixels. That's right. All right, I did watch things this week, and because of previous things I've talked about on this podcast, I watched Thor: Love and Thunder by myself.
Okay,
so thank you very much. I watched it in 2 installments because I didn't have time to watch a full 2 hour. It's a tight 2. I like that.
Yeah, it's not that. It's not an overly long Marvel movie. That one.
I loved it.
Well,
I absolutely loved it. Now, did I love it as much as Ragnarok? I think it's hard. It's like saying, when you see a movie that's like really fresh, like The Matrix, or I'm trying to think of another movie that when it came out, or Sixth Sense or something like that.
Sure.
Where, it was a movie that like completely took you by surprise. It was nothing like you'd ever seen before, like Thor: Ragnarok. As far as Marvel movies go, clearly it was still derivative, but I was not expecting that. The first Guardians of the Galaxy is another good example. It's hard for me to like the second one as much.
Yeah.
But, it was certainly Taika Waititi kind of doing his thing, like to the point where Marvel was like, yeah, we kind of trust you, so you just kind of do it. I was
they
like,
gave him pretty free reign, I think.
Yeah, maybe he did a little too much of his thing, but I still liked it quite a bit.
Great.
And I think it's something my wife is going to like, so I told her that last night.
Oh, okay.
She needs to watch it because it's got kids in it. And, the story is not all that complex. And Christian Bale is awesome in it. Like, he really... The only thing I kind of wish, and I know probably nobody's going to agree with me, is Gore the God Hunter, who is the main villain, played by Christian Bale, doesn't have a nose. Like in the comics, he has a flat face in the front, which gives him this very kind of iconic look. And I know you're just going to say the Voldemort thing and all that other stuff. I know, but at the same time, I kind of wish they had taken his nose off digitally. You know what I mean? I kind of wish they had.
I mean, it's Christian Bale, so maybe the problem was if they said that, he would have taken it off in real life, and they just didn't want to risk it.
That guy's kind of nutty. I wonder what he's like at parties. Is he's like way too intense? I don't know. Anyways, so that was about my only real complaint. I kind of felt like it was a little bit too day-glow. Like the costumes, especially Thor's costume, was a little too...
I kind of enjoyed it having some color for once.
Yeah, it's a little too bright for me. But I had known some of the backstory of Jane Foster from the comics, just from watching YouTube videos and stuff like that. And I didn't think they were going to do it as much like the comics as they did.
Oh, okay.
So I was kind of pleasantly surprised at that. But I thought the story was tight. I thought it was well told. The characters. There is one there's one aspect, and I won't spoil it because no one spoiled it for me, so I'm not going to spoil it for anybody else. But there's one thing that happens at the very beginning of this movie and then reoccurs throughout the movie that I kept forgetting was happening. And Rob and I'll talk about this afterwards.
Okay.
So I kept
I'm not totally clear. I've got a confused look on my face.
I know. I kept forgetting it was a part of this movie, and every time it happened, I started cracking up, and it's just, I mean, so it's stuff like that I think it makes movies like this fun, and they have a couple of after scenes that were interesting. I think my least favorite part of this entire movie, if you're gonna have to pin me down to it, was Russell Crowe.
Oh, really? My parents didn't like him either. I found him rather humorous. So
I was like, tastes. You know, I don't know, the weird accent, you know, like you know what I mean? I mean, like, just get somebody that talks like that. There's a lot of actors out there, and you know that or whatever that could play that role. And Russell Crowe is great. I like Russell Crowe. I mean, it's certainly nothing against him. I just thought. I felt like that was a casting that was simply so that we could put Russell Crowe in a scene.
That is what that was, yes.
And not so much that he was the right actor for it.
Sure.
Whereas a lot of the other stuff, you know, a lot of the other actors felt to be cast simply because that they are right for the role. I did like how what's the rock guy's character's name? I keep forgetting his name. Korg is just like literally the director saying, "This is what's happening in the movie," like straight up, just like, oh, and he asks a question of a character, and you're like, well, I mean, that just puts it on a plate.
Yeah,
but it's hilarious.
Taika did give himself a lot of lines since he plays the voice of Korg.
He did, but it's the character is sort of, he's just kind of hilarious. The way that usually I would be mad that they're laying it out so overtly, but because the character is the way he is, it's, to me, I enjoyed it. So I really enjoyed it. The other thing I watched, I haven't gotten through the entire first and maybe only season because that's the way Netflix is. But on Netflix, there's a series called The Imperfects, and it's a superhero adjacent series. It's like three kids, college age, early college age kids.
I don't know this one at all.
Yeah, they have a genetic disorder, and they were being treated with some. They got treated when they were kids all together, so they all they know each other. But it's a larger cohort. But these three end up together in the series, and they were treated for this genetic disorder as kids, and then they were given drugs to help treat them, and then one day the drugs stop, and when the drugs stop coming, they develop a sort of superpower. Each one of them develops one superpower, sort of thing, with usually some pretty serious drawbacks. And they're trying to, the whole gist of it is they're trying to find the doctor who has disappeared, the one who experimented on them and did all this stuff to them. They find out it's all sort of a mad scientist type of thing. I feel like this is a pretty good series to watch with younger people. So like I told my 6-year-old son it would probably be good for him and his girlfriend to watch, because they're into watching movies and stuff like that. There's nothing in here, like if you're as old as I am, have seen as many things as I have, there's nothing in here that's groundbreaking, or there's no, the twists are like, yeah, I know. I saw this coming, like you didn't invent that twist. I kind of feel like it's trying really hard to be captivating, and it's just kind of okay. The thing is one dude transforms into like a chupacabra. Right? And usually Netflix special effects are borderline garbage, but kind of okay. But I absolutely, like, they barely show this thing. So they spent a lot of money on just the few frames when he's in the scene, and he looks so freaking cool.
Oh, good.
So for me, it's worth it's worth seeing, just to see that happen once or twice. But I like the actors for the most part. The story happens so quickly that you really have to pay attention, because they're not going to spend any time explaining anything. They're really trying to keep the pace going without.
That might just be a bit of a Netflix thing at this point.
Yeah, at this point they're like, we got to tell the story because they're probably going to cancel us after one season.
When you get around to Arcane, you're going to feel the same way. It's like, hey, they ain't dilly dallying in that show. So
yeah, I'm going to finish this, and then I am probably going to go back and either do the last half of this last season of Stranger Things,
Mm-hmm.
and I also want to watch the Haunting of the House on
Hill
Haunted-
House?
Hill House. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got like 4 episodes into that, and then waited for
That's
my
from
son.
way
and-
back.
I know.
I never
And there's
saw
a,
it either.
There's a
too much.
sequel. There's a sequel to that
Yeah.
too that came out. All right. Sorry about that big segue, which is not at all spelled the way that you think it is. But this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, find our older episodes, our show notes, and the Flickr albums where we talk about, for all the pictures that we talk about on the podcast. Of course, you can find us on youtube.com/avrantpodcast.
Just AVRant on YouTube.
I'm sorry, AVRant.
That's the short
sorry.
one. YouTube.com/AVRant.
My brain was thinking I had said Facebook, but I was
Yet.
also thinking about YouTube at the same time. So facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. And there, usually our faces are up there, but they're not right now. But the pictures are. So we want to thank, I guess if you want to contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @firstreflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. I don't even know why I mentioned my Twitter, but it's @avrant_Tom.
The episodes do still get tweeted about.
Yeah. Somebody asked me about AV Gadgets posting on Facebook. Because I was having to do it. I'm not having. I have to do it manually because Facebook refuses to do it automatically. Like they take themselves like way too seriously, and they have all like it takes forever to get your app, whatever. I just gave up. So if you want to find Twitter, I think we post automatically to Instagram as well. And then I've got 2 different Facebook apps that are supposed to work, and neither one of them do right now. So I'm trying to get it to work. So if you're really caring about Facebook and whatever, then whatever. I don't care. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week and support the podcast in some way, one of the ways you can do that is going to patreon.com/avrantpodcast and signing up to be an ongoing, subscribing, contributing member of our podcast community.
That's the one.
That's the one. So Patreon will you sign up for like I think $1 is the minimum.
That's it.
A month, and they will take that money from you and then give most of it to us. So we have 138 patrons right now, including Jeremy and Michael. So thank you to Jeremy and Michael and our other 136 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is right. Patreon.com/AVRantPodcast is the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 138 patrons over there. Jeremy and Michael, thank you for being 2 of them.
If you can't support us financially, we completely understand. Just do something and we'll mention you here. So Ilango sent Rob an Amazon Canada gift card, presumably to help out with all of his, his replacing of God knows what over there. So
I still don't know, yes, but it is much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Can you get into your apartment?
Oh yeah, I can go there anytime I want. There's nothing in there, so there's not much reason to.
Where's all your stuff?
All my stuff is being stored in a warehouse by the restoration company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
So
did they like unplug your receiver and all your speakers and stuff like that?
Oh, everything's gone, yeah.
Everything's gone.
Yeah.
Are they supposed to put everything back up for you?
Supposedly. I don't really want them to. I'm going to be like, this stuff goes in this room, this stuff goes in this room, just leave it there and I'll put it all back.
I will say, though, that if you do decide to do that, instead of letting them do it, take a lot of pictures, like while they're still there, while they're putting it down, to make sure that, and check everything over, because they're going to try to hide anything that they can.
I'm not expecting to get all of my stuff back, and I'm not expecting most of it to be in good shape.
Yeah. One of the things that you can do is to support this podcast, and me in particular, is send me pictures to use on avgadgets.com with your permission to use them in perpetuity forever. So Gurinder, Bertrand, and Jeremy all did that for me. I will tell you, if you have sent me photos recently, or not even all that recently, I am way behind in editing those and getting them up. So mostly you guys do a great job of sending them in a very large format so that I can crop them as I want.
Right.
But that just takes extra time for me. So I'm way behind. So I apologize. It's my bad eyesight for the most part.
That's gotta be it.
That's been getting me behind.
It's all fixed
I am
now.
very old. I don't know if you guys have heard. I'm old. So thank you, Gurinder, Bertrand, Jeremy, and everybody else who sent me pictures to use on AV Gadgets.
For sure. I'll just say again, Gurinder, Bertrand, and Jeremy, thank you for sending your photos with permission for Tom to use them on avgadgets.com.
We got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during this, and as we heard recently, still existing pandemic. No matter what's going on, it does seem I'm very close to saying. I'm not saying that anymore, basically, because once they start releasing the yearly COVID shot, that'll whatever. I feel like at that point, we're no longer in the pandemic. It's
an endemic at this point.
Yeah, right. So we're very close to me having to not say this anymore, which I'm excited about on just like so many emotional levels. Believe me, a pandemic was not easy on Tom. It wasn't easy on anybody. I don't want to.
It sure wasn't.
Anybody was out there going, whew. Nailed it. But
right.
Yes, I'm very happy about that. So we do have some notes of gratitude from Gurinder, Ilango, Brandon, Aras, Bertrand, Michael, who says AV Gadgets deserves a shout out and more praise. It's an amazing website. Thank you, Michael. Jonathan and Jeremy. So thank you to all of you for thanking us.
Yeah, I'll say the names one more time. Gurinder, Ilango, Brandon, Aras, Bertrand, Michael, Jonathan, and Jeremy. Thank you all very much for sending in your notes of gratitude. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Oh, and on last Friday, from those of you that are listening to this podcast live, so that would have been the Friday before 9/20, whatever that is. I don't know, the 17th or 16th or something like that. I published the Everything You Know About Home Theater Bass is Wrong or something like that article, which talks about the infrasonic bass that Rob and I have talked about a number of times on here. And I've published an article before that to kind of like lead into it that said, how to get bass you can feel in your home theater, which talks about where the bass that kick you in the chest bass actually lives.
Right.
It is absolutely, looking at this research has absolutely changed my mind about subwoofers in general. I'm very happy for it, to be honest with you, because I love learning new things. Like, learning things is one of my favorite things to do, and the favorite part of a hobby is that initial part of the hobby where you know nothing and then you start to learn things.
You're learning the most.
You're learning. There's so much to learn that you can. So now that I've done this for so long, it's hard to really come up with absolutely new things. So it's very exciting for me. So check that article out. It just kind of is a good reference for you guys who are posting on forums and stuff like that, or like, whenever you see somebody saying, oh, if you want that kick you in the chest bass, you need to get a subwoofer that hits below 20. That's just flat out wrong. There can be no, I can't imagine these elephants were screaming at sub 20 hertz stuff, like feet away from a scientist, and the scientist is like, we had no idea this was happening. I'm like, they can't all be deaf. They can't all be, it's
supposedly
just
it's not even your ears at that point. Supposedly it's like your bones and the jelly inside of you or something that we're supposed to be feeling at these single hertz and 10 hertz frequencies. I'm like, nope.
Yeah, and it's exciting too, because and the thing is you're like, well, why are we just learning about this, and how come it's about elephants? Who's researching? Who's going to pay for this?
Right.
Like, think about the manufacturers. Like, do they care if it really matters that the below 20 hertz bass is, like, super tweeters exist, and there is research that shows that doesn't do anything, and they're still selling the dang
And if they can charge you $1,000 more because the spec says 14 16 instead of 17, whatever, then hey.
Exactly. All right. In the news, Perlisten Audio has introduced their first in-wall speaker models, and they've gone whole hog. 2 complete series of in-wall speakers, and the world's first in-wall speakers to receive the THX Dominus certification. The flagship S-Series in-walls use the same drivers as the in-room S-Series speakers. Excuse me. Excuse me again. A beryllium tweeter mounted between two of Perlisten's Techstream mid-range domes in their directivity pattern control waveguide, plus 1, 2, or 4 Techstream 7-inch woofers. I never want to have to say the word Techstream again. I'll be honest with you.
That is what they have trademarked, though. So
that is a very dumb word.
I think it's like a carbon fiber thing going on there.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But you know what? There's going to be somebody, if it hasn't happened already, it will. Somebody is going to say that the mid-range of these speakers, or any speaker that has this type of this branded driver, is going to be more textured, or
yes,
or less clear or something. Because
it's there in the name.
Texture. It's in the name. The R series in walls are less expensive and use 3 silk domes mounted in Perlisten's DPC array waveguide, plus 1 or 2 pulp fiber woofers. All of Perlisten's in walls are fully enclosed with aluminum cabinets that are 4 inches deep. Well, I like that. I don't know about
I like that very much. These are sealed. It's not even like a bat can. It's like, these are just sealed speakers that are 4 inches deep and designed to go inside of your wall with magnetic grills that can be painted on the front, of course.
Right. The largest S7i models, lowercase I, of course, because let's not be gauche.
But it's also in-wall.
Yeah. S5i models are THX Dominus certified as front speakers. The smaller S4i, as well as the R4i and R5i models, are THX Dominus certified as surround speakers, or THX Ultra certified as front speakers because of the presumed difference in seating from the speaker.
Yes, maximum output capability. All of these are pretty high sensitivity, but although they're all 4 ohm rated, every single one of these Perlisten speakers is 4 ohm rated. So when you're seeing this sort of like 91, 92 dB sensitivity, but that's 4 ohm, that's like 89 from everything else. So the sensitivity isn't necessarily that much higher, but it's on the higher end of normal, and then very high power handling. All of Perlisten speakers have very high power handling. So to really hit those THX Ultra and THX Dominus output levels, you're going to need some beefy amplifiers. That is going to be something that you're going to want to have powering these speakers. But they've basically taken the designs of their in-room speakers, put them into sealed 4-inch deep in-wall models, and I'm happy about that. I think they're good designs.
So the exact pricing depends on your local Perlisten dealer, but the flagship S7i is listed online from several sites with a price of $7,500 each, which is $1,000 less than the S7T tower version. Most of the other models appear to be about $500 less than the in-room versions, which, I mean, if the cabinet is part of the price, that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So something to ballpark around $6,000 each for the S5i models, $3,500 each for the S4i, and around $3,000 each for the R5i, and $2,000 each for the R4i.
So those are not exact prices. I am ballparking those because, like I say, they only sell through dealers, so you're going to have individual prices depending on the dealer that you're working with. But just to give a ballpark idea of what sort of prices you're looking at, those shouldn't be way out of line.
Some comments here. Josh saw a comment on one of his Reddit posts from Tom. That's me, not a different Tom.
That's right.
Anyways, he went down a rabbit hole searching for other forums for Tom's username. He came across an old post on Axiom's Audio's blog showing an old setup of Tom's blast from the past. This is my Axiom setup, and I had this is a 32-inch CRT.
It's a CRT TV with a center speaker perched on top of it. Remember those good old days?
Yeah, I don't know what's in that black thing that's in the corner back there. I don't remember that. I don't remember what
behind
that
your
is.
Seats.
Yeah, it's
not a triangular thing. Yeah, that's not a bass trap. So I don't know what that is.
That's not a bass trap. I don't know what that is. I don't remember that. I may have built that myself. That may be in fact, now that I think about it, that's what that is. I built it's just a very thin panel that straddles that corner.
Okay.
I built all these panels that are in here, which is why the one behind the handmade rack there, to the left of the TV, in front of the EP500, is sort of looks bowed. That is not an artifact of the picture. That lumber was not straight.
Right.
I used it anyways. So that's the way that is. There's a toy way at the top of the thing. There's a flashlight above my center channel because I I needed to get behind there and to see. That was before my eyes went really bad. These are M22s up front, and then the Q whatever 8s on the sides and 4s in the back. I ended up taking the 4 ones off the back.
Quad pole surround speakers from Axiom Audio. Yeah.
I ended up taking the 4s off the back, and this is one of the main reasons why I don't recommend surround back speakers in small rooms, is because I had them back there and they actually made things worse.
Right.
So, yeah, this was a long time ago, and those are my blue recliners that I bought without actually sitting on them, and it's why I never recommend doing that again anymore either. And if you look on the seat there, there's 2 remotes, and one is for the receiver, and the other one, I think one is for the DVD player, and one is for the receiver. I think that was the 3800, or
not like a Pronto or anything?
3805. No, it's not a Pronto. I had a UMC remote eventually, but it was rectangular. It was kind of trapezoidal. So I think this was like it was a more touchscreen version, and it came with the 3805, if I remember correctly. Very old system. You can actually still see the boxes through the little walkway there. And this is actually a really nice color, but this is not gray. It's sort of I don't know what color this is. It looks gray, but it's not the color of this. Anyway, so yeah, that's a blast from the past.
It is.
Kerry wrote in. They wanted to comment regarding Infinite Gary's question last week about the FM broadcast of a baseball game having an 8-second delay versus the AM broadcast of the same game. Live broadcasts also often have an audio delay buffer so that any profanity or unwanted sounds can be bleeped out or silenced during the live broadcast. So maybe the FM station was using that while the AM station wasn't, assuming that nobody listens to AM because, oh my God, does anybody still listen to AM? Or perhaps they simply had different buffer lengths, with the FM stations being on a longer buffer and delay. That is a very good point, Kerry. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's a good point, Kerry. Thank you.
Dazz heard us talking about using MDF to make DIY acoustic panel frames. From experience, he suggests buying from a local wood supplier or cabinet maker, where he found better quality and lower prices than the big box hardware stores. 3/4 inch was most common, but 1/2 inch could be found and made for the best combination of weight, sturdiness, and very little waste when making 2 foot by 4 foot panels that are 4 inches deep. On a different topic, he tried setting his Apple TV 4K to output 4K HDR rather than switching between HDR and SDR. He was hoping that it would eliminate the black screens in between YouTube videos and whenever ads come on using his Vizio P-Series TV, but sadly, the in-between black screens persist.
So at that point, I'm guessing that it's like the codec change is enough, that there is a little blip and a new handshake taking place. So although he didn't specifically mention if he had set the frame rate to not automatically switch, so
that is true.
There's got to be both the dynamic range and the frame rate both have to be set to not match, and that might be the other thing to try there.
Yeah. Let's see here. Jonathan, the CDEN 4.0, bought a Sofabaton X1 during their Kickstarter campaign, but he'd left it unopened in the closet for months, which is exactly where mine is. Thank you very much. He finally tried it out to see if it could replace a Harmony remote. Where the heck are the number buttons? Is he really meant to only use the guide when changing DirecTV channels? He's hoping his Harmony remote somehow lives forever. Yeah, I know, dude. Or until somebody over at Harmony makes a better stupid remote, or to make better decision to come
at
back.
Sofabaton, so a bit of the thing with the Sofabaton, you really do want to set everything up as activities. I definitely would not recommend using the X1 as just a device-to-device remote. The U1 works very nicely as a single device to single device type of universal remote, and you can actually get creative and do a little bit more with the macros with the U1 than you might anticipate when you first go in. But the U1, of course, is infrared only, and its infrared blaster is a little bit on the weak side, to be honest. You got to have that thing pointed pretty darn straight at your devices for the U1 to work. So unfortunately, it's weak on that side, but it has all the buttons and works more on a device-to-device. With the X1, you definitely want to set everything up as activities, but when you do, it does not put any buttons into the screen at the top that is controlled with the scroll wheel that clicks. So it means every button that there is no hard button on the remote itself, and there are very few hard buttons on the remote itself, everything else you have to program in there one by one onto that screen and activate it with the scroll wheel and the click, including individual number buttons for your cable remotes. So it is a bit of a pain. I certainly agree with that. But it can be done, but then you have to get used to using the scroll wheel and the click a lot.
All right, Damien. Damien wanted to weigh in regarding blacking out your front wall when you have a projection system. He went with Sherwin-Williams TriCorn black paint in a velvet or eggshell finish. You can't quite remember which. They have a lot of finishes.
They do.
Sherwin-Williams, they started going through it. I was like, that's too many. I don't.
And some of them are
many.
only available with certain types of paint and that. So yeah.
Yeah, I got the one I was like, I don't want the matte or whatever the crazy.
There's flat and matte.
Yeah, the crazy one is that if you look at it wrong, it scuffs.
That's right.
Okay, so for those of you that aren't really aware, so the matter the finish, the I guess the more delicate is the way I would describe it. Is it it's
less
if you
durable.
rub against it, it's less durable, and on the other side, the glossier it is, the easier it is to deal with. So it's very. That's why your baseboards are always glossy. They're glossy because it's very very resistant to scuff marks, and when you do scuff it, you can clean it pretty easily, and it doesn't like rub off and all that. So, yeah. Anyways, he loves the way it turned out and how it looks as though your projector's image is just floating in space when the lights are out. He knows people sometimes worry that the paint isn't quite as black as putting Fidelio velvet on the walls, but he says, keep in mind, your projector's black levels, even with the Epson Ultra Black or a JVC, are not actually pure black. Something we say all the time around here. With switching aspect ratios, he can still see the black bars if he's looking for them, and they're definitely much lighter than his TriCorn black paint. I know, yeah. So this is why I really feel like and he's showing there. We're going to show some images here, and it looks like the black bars are really.
I mean, that is certainly overexposed. The images,
that is overexposed.
It's to give you on a computer through YouTube or through Flickr a very easy visual representation of just how black. So, I mean, that's a velvet border on the frame of the projection screen itself,
right?
And then his TriCorn black paint all around that. And visually, when you're looking at it, it's like, yes, the black bars are definitely darker than that eye versus what you're seeing these overexposed photos, but it's just to give you the idea that that TriCorn black paint blends right in black velvet border of his projection frame. So if you're worried that there's going to be some light spill above and below your screen, and that using paint instead of velvet on your front wall is going to mean that you're seeing all the light reflected back at you, like, yeah, don't worry about that. The black definitely considerably lighter in shade than the TriCorn black paint. So he's all for going with the paint.
All right. Let's do some questions here. Ryan's neighbor picked up a 5.1 speaker package from SVS during their Labor Day sale. Prime bookshelves, Prime center, and Prime satellites. His room is 20 by 20 and range in a corner setup, which is always difficult. They're getting an L-shaped sectional, but the seating layout will remain the same, with the L-shaped couch pushed into one corner of the room and the TV diagonally opposite. Yay, I guess. I don't know.
Nope, I mean, that's what it's going to be.
That's what it is. He'd like our advice on where the Prime satellite surround speakers should go. They'll be mounted using monoprice wall mounts. So the L shape is in one corner, or will be in one corner. Right now, there's two different sofas on those two walls, but it's going to be one big sofa after this.
That's right.
So what you're kind of worried about here is the fact that either they're going to be to get them far enough so that everybody gets the speakers behind them. In theory, what is that noise?
Don't know. It might be the furnace in my parents' place.
I think it sounds like your microphone is adjusting itself up. Oh. And you're getting it sounds like there is like the tide is coming in to your
Sorry.
So when you stop talking, all of a sudden it like the levels keep going up. You get this sort of hiss, slowly rising. So it sounds like.
Well,
so the problem here.
Get rid of that for the recording. I don't know.
We'll find out. Yeah, there's no really good way to do this, because if you're sitting in the corner, the surround speakers are going to be in front of you, and if you make it so the person in the corner that's directly in front of the TV, because it's they're sitting in the corner that's opposite the corner that the TV is in. If you make it so the surround speakers are good for them, they're going to be on the wrong side of everybody else on the couch.
Right.
So you're kind of hosed, and I would recommend. So there is an image here, and I'm sure Rob is showing it.
Yeah, I've put up a diagram of sort of the generally recommended thing to do in a corner setup like this, which is essentially having the surround speakers. The surround left speaker would be to the left of the left portion of the L-shaped couch. The surround speaker right would be to the right side of the L-shaped thing. And then you're just aiming them more or less directly along the walls so that the dispersion pattern of the surround speakers will cover as many of the seats on that L-shaped couch as possible. Now, none of the seats really have the surround speakers behind them in this scenario, but behind you would be very difficult, because with the L-shaped couch, you're basically going to have a seat even in the corner that's directly opposite the TV. So there's no real way to get your surround speakers behind the seats unless you're going to move the L-shaped couch substantially away from the walls. But this at least gets the surround left speaker to the left of everybody, the surround right speaker to the right of everybody. And if we're looking at the room itself, you're going to say, okay, well, there's basically an open doorway and a window right where those surround speakers are shown in the diagram. But I would argue maybe you just elevate them. You elevate the surround speakers above that window and above that doorway, because having your surround speakers elevated in this scenario, like elevated more than we normally would in a dedicated theater, having them up quite high, that's just going to help with keeping everything sounding ambient and diffuse, and that's what we want to do. So I would basically have your surround right speaker mounted above the open doorway and more or less firing along the wall, and then on the other side above the window and more or less firing along the wall.
Yeah, I think height is going to help you out here, because no one's getting a really good experience anyways.
Right.
Like if this would be one of the few times, and I've seen this said on other forums and stuff like that. One of the few times where I would either recommend that you go with in-ceiling speakers if you were in a normal sized room, or speakers that are placed like behind the couch and like pointed up.
Right.
It's very there's no good way of doing it. So it's gonna be a compromise. So yes, up high to the left and to the outsides of the of whatever couch you're looking at there.
Yeah.
And then firing kind of at towards each other or right down that wall.
Yep.
So any suggestion on speaker stands to hold the prime bookshelf speakers? Obviously, I use Santa stands in mine. I don't even know if they still make these things. I don't know where they come from anymore. But yeah, I would just end up at Monoprice. Or what's the other one that we talk about? Mounted or something like that?
Mounted these days has quite a few. I'm actually going to suggest Dayton's stands that you can get over at Parts Express, because they're not crazy expensive. It's $110 for a pair. Or actually, they're less than that over at Parts Express. They're $93 for a pair when I was looking up the prices. And I mean, they're nice looking. They have all the features I'm looking for, which is a nice stable base. They give you either like you have your choice of putting either spikes or the rubber feet on the bottom of them. They have little rubber pads that you can attach to the top plates, which is nice. Give yourself a little bit of damping between the speaker and the top plate. And then the columns themselves are hollow and can be filled with, sand or kitty litter or lead shot or whatever you want to put in there. Don't fill it all the way to the top. The idea is to lower the center of gravity, so maybe fill it about halfway. But it's got all those features, and honestly, they look quite nice. So all the hardware's there at a very reasonable price. The 28-inch height should probably be quite reasonable for this room height. So I think that'll work. Those are the Dayton stands, and then mount it. They have selections as well that are not too expensive. Under $100 if you want just a different design. And Monoprice does have their monolith stands. Those are the ones that go for about $110 for a pair. So I think any of those does the job quite well. And Sanus is always a good choice.
Yeah. So there's a child in this picture. So I have included a link to my article on how to child or pet proof your speaker stands, and it does talk about filling them with something to make them heavier. It
Yeah.
also mentions the museum putty that we talk about all the
Yes,
time
yes,
here,
yes.
blue tack or whatever. I
Yeah.
will tell you're like, I don't know if that really works. I don't touch my speakers I don't touch my stands when I move my speakers. I grab the speaker
Oh,
the stand
jeez.
comes with.
Oh, man.
Okay, because that stuff is not planned. All right, you have to work to get it off. It'll come off, and it doesn't leave a mark.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's on, it is on. So I'm gonna leave that there. And you've got carpet, or your friend, I guess, has carpet in here. I'm going to tell you what I do, and you do what you want. They give you spikes. They give you the rubber nubby thingies or whatever they are. I use nothing. I put nothing. Yeah. I put nothing down there.
Just the
I want as much surface area touching the carpet as possible so that it is supported and that carpet will absorb the vibrations for you. If you put something that goes through the carpet or something, even the rubber nub things, which go partially through the carpet, you now got 4 points that are taking the majority of the vibrations from the speakers, right? If you just take everything off and you just have it sitting flat, even if it's got kind of a bowed base, which mine does, the pads where the area where the spike would have screwed in is much larger, and it spreads out the weight over
it's pounds per square inch. So there you go.
So I would put nothing underneath there, nothing at all, and just sit it on top of the carpet. So our second question comes from somebody who may or may not be named Sherry.
Yeah,
we're not really sure. It's a little confusing. So whatever, whoever you are, if you know somebody named Sherry, and you sent a question,
that's right.
Or if your name is Sherry, or whatever, or you like to drink sherry, who knows. Anyways, this emailer said they were a relatively new listener. What do the Atmos position labels on your AV receiver actually do? For example, if you were to change the label from top fronts to front heights, what actually changes in the AV receiver? Does it apply a different EQ curve or change the levels or something? So remember, the idea of Atmos is that there are objects that sounds are no longer channel based. In theory, they're no longer channel based, meaning that the speaker the sound designer didn't go, okay, I need this much sound coming out of this speaker and another that same sound but at a lower volume coming out of a different speaker in order to create the image or the sound effect I want. Instead, they say, here is a computer that I am interacting with. I want the sound to sound like it's coming from here.
Yep.
Wherever that place is.
And then it's assigned coordinates as metadata.
That's right. XYZ coordinates, so that it is in a three-dimensional plane. And then your AV receiver says, I've got speakers in these locations based on what you, the owner, told it is where you put your speakers, right? And then with that information, it can say, in order to create an image, a sound in that XYZ location, I need to play that sound from this speaker this much and from this other speaker this much, and then invert it and have it come from this other speaker this much. But if you change those names, then it changes how it thinks it needs to direct those sounds in order to get that three-dimensional sound that appear in your room.
In theory, that's all true. I would say, however, in Atmos, in actual Dolby Atmos, the difference between having your speakers labeled as top fronts and top rears versus front heights and rear heights is effectively nothing. Because if you look at the elevation angle ranges that are acceptable within Dolby's speaker placement guidelines, they overlap.
Right.
They completely overlap. The front height position is anywhere from 30 degrees elevation to 55 degrees elevation, and that completely encompasses the front heights, which are from 30 to 45. So, in effect, for Atmos, there's no difference whether you label them as top fronts or front heights or top rears or rear heights. There's a little bit of difference when you label something as top middles, because then it is assuming that it's playing the sounds from directly overhead and sounds that were supposed to be above and behind you. Some of that's mixed into your surround back speakers if you have them. But where there's a bigger difference is with DTS:X. With DTS:X, they intended for their system to use heights, front heights and rear heights at 45-degree elevation angles. And if you label your speakers as top fronts and top rears, whenever there are sounds that are supposed to be coming out of the front height positions in a DTS-X sound mix, they will actually try to phantom image a front height by putting some sound into your front speakers, your main speakers, and your top front labeled speakers. And in the back, they'll put some sound into the surround back and the top rear labeled speaker, trying to create a phantom height speaker image. You are better off with DTS-X having your overhead speakers labeled as front heights and rear heights, even if they're at a 50 or 55 degree elevation angle, where Dolby would have you labeling top fronts and top rears. If you continue to just label them as front heights and rear heights, it will make sure that when you're playing DTS-X, all of the overhead sounds only come from your overhead speakers, and they aren't trying to do this phantom imaging along with your main speakers and surround back speakers, which really doesn't work because we don't listen with our heads turned 90 degrees to the side, and we don't phantom image vertically very well at all. So my recommendation is always set your overhead speakers to front heights and rear heights. For Atmos, it makes essentially no difference at all, and for DTS-X, it sounds better because it keeps the overhead sounds strictly in those overhead speakers.
And I have included an article on AV Gadgets that just talks about that exact thing. So if you didn't follow that or want to hear it again or want to be able to digest it more slowly, you can go check it out over AV Gadgets. It's called How Should You Label Your Atmos Speakers?
That's it.
Stan asks, we often mention Room EQ Wizard and the UMic 1 for measuring your room, but Stan has managed to downsize to just using an iPad Pro. He doesn't have Windows or Mac. So is there a way to do something similar to Room EQ Wizard using just an iPad? I don't know, Rob, what you got?
Right, so you cannot run Room EQ Wizard itself, which is free software. So you'll have to look for an app that has similar functionality, and there certainly is one for iOS and iPad OS devices from a company called Studio 6 Digital, which is just called Audio Tools. Audio Tools costs $20 for the basic, and you get a few handy things. You get an FFT at this point, an SPL meter, a few speaker test tones. That's what you get for your $20 there. Now they have a gazillion add-on modules that do all sorts of more advanced things. So if you want to start getting into your RT60 times, your waterfall graphs, impulse response measurements, and then some very sophisticated modeling stuff that even Room EQ Wizard doesn't necessarily have, you can separately purchase a whole bunch of modules if you want to. If you were to unlock everything that is offered in Audio Tools, it would cost you $400. But you do not need everything that they offer to just do your calibration of your speaker system and setup, but just so you have an idea of how much you could end up paying. Now, Studio 6 Digital, they sell their own calibrated microphones that come with a calibration file to use with an iPad or an iPhone. They have them both with a Lightning connector or a USB-C connector, because I think with your iPad Pro that actually has USB-C now, depending on what model year it was, but they have both Lightning and USB-C options. It's their iTest Mic 2, which has a very similar module to the UMic 1 and other microphones that come in that style and look that way. However, it's $230, which is like twice the price of a UMic 1, basically. So honestly, I would just point you over to Dayton's IMM6S microphone. That also comes with a little calibration file you can plug in, although it's, like a batch based calibration file, not an individual calibration file. But honestly, it's good enough for your purposes because it only costs $20 for that microphone, the Dayton IMM6S. Now, that does just have a 3.5 millimeter jack that's meant to plug into a headphone jack, which, of course, most of our iPhones and iPads don't have anymore, although some iPads still have the headphone jack. So if that's what you've got, that could work just directly plugged into the headphone jack. But of course, you can use the little dongle that converts the headphone jack to USB-C or to Lightning, depending on what you have, if you want to continue using that. So for $20, that's what I would do. I don't really feel like the iTest Mic 2 for $230 is genuinely worth it, but if you want something that is hardware equivalent to a UMic 1, that is an option that can plug directly into your iPhone or iPad.
Reginald has his current front, left, and right speakers bi-wired, not bi-amped. He has dedicated bi-wire speakers, so they have a single pair of connection plugs on one end for the amplifier, and then 2 pairs of connections on the other end for the bi-wire speakers. He'd like to switch over to a different pair of speakers that only have 1 pair of binding posts. He doesn't want the hassle of running new speaker wires. So what's the best way to connect his bi-wire speaker cables to his new speakers? Strip the ends, twist them together, stick it in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's happening on the other end.
You could also just like wrap 2 of the binding like 2 of them are left dangling, and just wrap them in some electrical tape or put something plastic and non-conductive over them and leave 2 dangling. There's really nothing wrong with leaving a couple dangling.
I just strip I don't know what he's got at the ends of these things. I'm sure they're
if they're
somehow
expensive and soldered on or something like that with the banana plugs or spade lugs, and you don't want to actually cut those off and strip them, then my idea of just leaving a couple of them dangling and just make sure that they are non-conductive. So that might be as simple as wrapping the banana plugs in electrical tape so that they're not going to make electrical contact with anything accidentally. That's all you need to do.
I mean, if they're banana plugs, you cannot use both. You really can't use both of them on one binding post. But if in theory you had spades,
you could actually
just
connect
jam
them both
in there.
You could
just crank it down.
Both reds on the red side, both blacks on the black side, of course. But if you left one red and one black dangling, that's fine too. Just make sure they're not going to accidentally cause an electrical arc with anything.
Honestly, if it were me, I would just strip both ends, go to Amazon or wherever, and buy yourself a pair of, or 2 pairs in this case, of banana plugs, and
you're just feeding the bare wire ends in.
Those bare wires into there, and then you're back to having just regular speaker cable, which is exactly what's happening on the other end. You just can't see it. Mark has a room that's 22 by 18 by 8, in which he'd like to install a projector and screen. He can have full light control, and he's strongly leaning towards JVC NP5 for the projector.
Good choice.
He's also strongly leaning towards a Seymour AV Premier screen frame using their glacier white fabric with its benchmark gain of 1.3, which seems high for a room that he has full light control, but let's go on. He's pretty sure he wants the screen that is 140 inches wide. I have an article for you. And since he liked CinemaScope movies to be larger than TV shows, he intends to go with the constant image height setup using a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio screen. Okay, maybe I don't have as much of an article for you, but I'm still going to put it in here. He tried plugging his numbers into Projector Central's throw distance calculator, but he wasn't sure if he'll have enough brightness. For HDR?
That's going to be the question.
That's going to be the question. Also, what would be a good throw distance for all of this to get the best looking image? Rob's going to do that for you while I find my article.
Sure. So, if we go with the figures that you've mentioned, now, one thing you want to be cognizant of whenever you're using the projection throw distance calculator from Projector Central, which is a wonderful tool, but whenever you're using it with JVC's 4K projectors, you actually want to make sure you set the aspect ratio to 16 by 9, because the default aspect ratio of the panels in the JVC 4K projectors is 4096 by 21 60s. So it's actually a 1.9 to 1, basically. Like, it's the actual 4K cinema 4K resolution, not ultra high definition resolution. And the reason you want to set it by 16 by 9 and not even the 2.35 to 1 setting, which is also available in the drop-down menu from Projector Central, is because if you set it to the 2.35, it uses the full width of the panel, which isn't really what happens when you send a signal from any video source that we'd be using to the JVC, because the video source is sending a 16 by 9 image, which means there are little black bars on the left and right of what the JVC is actually throwing out there, and it's throwing out a native 16 by 9 image. So that's what you want to use as your aspect ratio. And then, since you've gone by widths instead of diagonals, which is totally fine, you just make sure that the image size is set to its width rather than its diagonal, which is the default, and plug in the number that you want. In your case, you said you wanted a 140-inch width screen. So if you do that, and we go by the figures that Projector Central estimates, the manufacturer's spec is almost always a little bit higher in what they're thinking that the brightness is going to be, whereas Projector Central, they base it on their actual measurements from their reviews, so they're estimating, and it's typically a little bit lower than what the manufacturer's spec would say. And then the screen gain, it's a benchmark gain of 1.3, but when you measure it, that Seymour AV, the Glacier White, it's typically comes out closer to 1.1 as far as the gain goes. So everything, the brightness is probably a little bit lower than the most optimistic interpretation of the specs of both the screen and the projector. So if you plug all that in, basically if you put the projector as physically close as the zoom range would allow, you would get the brightest image possible. But, typically you're not going to have it like that close because it might end up directly over your head and you want to have it a little bit behind you. So I've just set it at a distance of 19 and a half feet, which is about as far back in a 22-foot room as JVC's projectors would go, because they want you to have 28 inches from the lens of the JVC projector to the back wall, because there's the entire body of the projector, which is about 20 inches, and then they want you to have 8 inches of free air behind the back of projector for airflow purposes. So I've set this projector with its lens to be 19 and a half feet from the screen. That gives you, in the calculator says 72 nits exactly. It's going to be right around 75 nits. That's with it on high lamp mode. So for SDR, for standard dynamic range, that'd be no problem whatsoever. That'd be totally fine for standard dynamic range. It's more than you need. You need about 50, 55 nits for standard dynamic range with a projector. But for HDR, you would hopefully have about 100 nits. That's what we're hoping for with a projector, about 100 nits. And you're going to struggle to hit that with this projector at this particular screen size. So, if you just move that projector as close as it possibly can go, Projector Central, if you're going with the more optimistic things of like the manufacturer spec of how many lumens it can throw out there, and the 1.3 gain that's mentioned by Seymour AV, well, now it inched up just over 100 nits by those more optimistic specs, and having the projector as close as it could possibly be. But I mean, what I'm getting at here is you're definitely on the borderline and probably a little bit below where ideally we would have that nit number for HDR content. Again, standard dynamic range, no problem whatsoever. Now, one thing that you could definitely consider here is decreasing the screen size, and not by a ton. I'm saying go down to 130 inches in width rather than 140 inches in width, which diagonally on a 16:9 screen is like 150 inches versus 162 or so. Now there, if you go with the lower thing of the lower gain 1.1, Projector Central's estimate of what the actual light will be, but put the projector about as close as it can possibly go, which is just a little over 16 feet from lens to screen, well, you're at 95 nits. It's 92 in the calculator. It'd definitely be about 95. Like, you're really close to that HDR spec. And if that screen actually does have a little bit more gain than 1.1, it is closer to 1.3, you'd be right there. You'd be absolutely right there. So something to keep in mind here is that if you were going for like my preferred field of view, which is 45-degree field of view, 22.5 degrees to the left, 22.5 degrees to the right, would be the edges of my screen when I'm looking forward from the central seat. With that 160-inch diagonal, that 140-inch width, you'd need to be 14 feet from eyes to screen to have that 45-degree field of view. If you drop down to the 130-inch width, the 150-inch diagonal, if it were 16:9, you'd need to be 13 feet from eyes to screen. It's a 1 foot seating distance difference to get you to the full nits that you need for HDR. And the projector is just going to have an easier time. So, I mean, 150-inch diagonal, 16:9, that's a big projection screen. Most projectors can't handle that easily. NP5 can do it. It can legitimately do it with that. And then, of course, if you just decide you're going to have that same width but go for 2.35 to 1 instead, well, just be prepared. IMAX features, of course, are going to have light spill above and below the screen. Some subtitles might get cut off. If you're watching anything with subtitles, that's 2.35 to 1, but sometimes the bottom of the subtitles goes into the black bar below, so just be prepared. That's one reason why Tom and I just like to just stick with the 16:9 screen at all times and just go with the full size. But if you got height restrictions or something for some reason, we can understand that. And that'd be my recommendation. So I would suggest going a little bit smaller, 130 inches in width, and sit 1 foot closer, because that's all you need to do.
Scott. Scott has a run in. I'm sorry. Scott has to run an in-wall conduit from the location where his amplifier will be to the front of wall locations for his front, left, and right speakers. This is just for a 2-channel setup. He has some braided AudioQuest speaker wire already in hand. It's not in-wall rated, and it does not have a PVC outer jacket like most of their speaker wire. Will it be okay to run inside the wall since it will be inside the conduit? I don't think so. I don't think that's how that works.
Yeah, to cover our butts, legally speaking, no. You can't do that unless it is metal conduit, like outdoor rated conduit. I'm pretty sure if you have metal outdoor or outside of wall rated conduit, that you're pretty much allowed to run any wire that you want in there. Although I would still check with your city hall, because municipality to municipality, the rules on that might be different. But if you've just run the regular, Smurf tube, the blue conduit that you would typically run, legally speaking, insurance-wise speaking, you're not supposed to run speaker wire inside of there that is not in-wall rated, because that's about fumes. It's like if the wire catches on fire, what type of fumes are going to come out of it, and that's what the fire rating is about in that case. And just having inside of the Smurf tube isn't enough to let you do that. So
honestly,
I'd have to say our advice is don't do that.
So cheap. Even the in-wall rated stuff.
Get it from Monoprice.
So cheap. So yeah, it's really hard for me to. I mean, as somebody who is cheap, it's very cheap. My wife. So my bike broke down this week, the first time since I had it, and I went and looked it up. I took it home on October 6th, and so far, if I had ridden today, it would have been exact, or almost exact, but I am at 5,170 miles on that bike since I bought it in October of last year. And the bike shop guy I was talking with, he's like, yeah, you're right on the cusp of needing to replace some parts on this thing. He goes, you know, 5,000 miles. That's, you might get 10,000 miles out of it, but you might not. So, a lot of times it's just easier to go ahead and replace everything, get it running perfectly now. And of course, I haven't done that because I'm cheap. But we're talking cents. I mean, that's how much speaker wire costs.
Well, per foot.
Per foot, right? And you're just going, you're not going that far. And in this case,
it's like, it's not as though there's something there that he would have to remove and replace. It's like you're running the speaker wire within your new conduit regardless.
You could literally pay for this entire process by selling those AudioQuest cables.
Yeah.
Just sell them. They're not going to sound any different. Just sell them. Scott is I'm sorry, it's the same guy, right? Yeah. Scott is working on designing and building a fully dedicated home theater room. The plan is to use all in-wall and in-ceiling speakers except for the subs. He was thinking it would be best to put absorption panels directly around the front, left, and right speakers, plus typical treatments all around the rest of the room. But he was told by someone who has some room acoustics knowledge and experience that he shouldn't put absorbers all around his front in-wall speakers because they need the reflections of the front wall in order to sound right. Scott figured putting absorbers next to the in-wall speakers would reduce reflected sound and increase direct sound, which he thought would be a good thing. What do we say? Generally speaking, and you would really want to talk to the speaker manufacturer, but in almost every case I can think of, the idea when designing the speaker, the in-wall speaker, is that there is wall on the sides of it, to a certain extent, and you got to think of it like the front baffle of your speaker has of your in-room speaker. They often have a curve, or they have a design, or they have a shelf, or like something going on. It's usually not just flat. It might be, and if it's just flat, that's also a design choice as well. But the speaker itself was tested with that cabinet. And the speaker that you're putting into your wall is also been tested with a flat wall, a reflective wall all around it, because that's the way they assume people are going to install them.
I think that Scott might have been picturing like the THX Baffle wall in his mind, which, the entire front wall is padded. But in the THX Baffle wall design, the in-wall speakers are still slightly, they're flush, or actually they're slightly proud of all of that front wall foam that's shown in like the THX Baffle wall. So It might just be wording, might just be a little bit unclear. But if your
Right.
idea was you were going to put the in-wall speakers directly into the drywall and then have acoustic panels that would be like jutting out in front
Right.
of those speakers a bit, then I agree with your friend or whoever this person was you were talking to who said, yeah, you probably don't want to like, border all around your in-wall speakers with acoustic panels that are in front of the in-wall
Right.
speaker, because that will affect the dispersion to the sides and the up and down
I
coming
would
out
just
of the
contact
speakers.
them. Whoever you're going to buy the
I would-
speaker
yeah,
the speakers from, just say, hey, how close can I put acoustic panels to these installed speakers? And these are, I'm going to get 4-inch panels. They're going to be 2 inches off the wall.
Yeah.
Or, whatever you're going to do. Just let them know what it is, and they should be able to say, hey, don't put them any closer than blah.
But
and
like
that'll be
in
your
general, if you're gonna treat the entire front wall with acoustic panels, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, I would just make sure that your in-wall speakers are mounted in front of that acoustic treatment, just like you would see on a THX Baffle wall.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's like a little bit of acoustic treatments is good, or maybe a lot of acoustic treatment is good. Even more must be better. Well, there's a point where you're like, wait a second, you put the acoustic treatment in front of the speaker, that's a problem. Yeah. And in this case, we have to think about how the speaker was designed. Gurinder is working away on closing in his basement home theater. It used to have a large opening to the left side into the rest of the basement. He was originally thinking of installing a double stud wall just within the former opening, but after examining the joists, plumbing, and HVAC, he settled on a staggered stud wall. He asks, how should the staggered stud wall be insulated? He's seen instructions with fiberglass insulation woven around the staggered studs. He's also seen instructions to cut strips to fit in the 2-inch gaps created by the staggered studs. He's got rock wool insulation on hand that he tended to use for DIY acoustic panels. He also has the cheap white fiberglass insulation. What do we suggest? Man, I would just fill those gaps. That's what I would do, but...
Well, I mean, like the easy way, I would use that cheap white fiberglass insulation that you have, because all we're trying to do is not have a drum echo chamber inside of the studs of your wall. That's all we're trying to do with the insulation here. It's not for thermal purposes. It's not really sound blocking purposes. Like, we're just trying to make sure that inside the studs is not a drum. So, assuming it was made for 16-inch on center, all you need to do is cut a little slice in the middle. And then it'll fit around the staggered stud that's in there, and that's all you need to do. There's it's not even that you have to cut out a chunk. This is pretty pliable, easy to move white fiberglass insulation. So you just cut a little slice, and then it'll fit right in there with the little notch staggered stud that's in the middle of your regular 16-inch on center to fit, and that's all you need to do. Nothing more complicated.
Yeah. Okay. His current plan is to have one door that swings out into the hallway, but if he discovers that the single door does not block enough sound, he's wondering if he could squeeze in a second door that would swing into the theater to create a double door system. Do we have any suggestions for what he should do right now about the door jamb to maybe allow for that second door in the future? Dude, you need 2 knobs, which is kind of the issue there, that you have to have a very, very wide doorway, which seems unlikely given your current plans.
Of course, a staggered stud is a bit deeper than just a regular 2x4,
but it's not that
deep. It is not that deep. No, I would focus on a single solid core door. That's what I would focus on. Build the door jamb for a single solid core door and leave it at that.
He made his own seat riser for his back row, simple construction, about 9 inches high. Would there really be much benefit from putting insulation inside of it? It's just hollow right now. We have talked about this. Like anything else that can have, if it's got ways of air getting in there, it can turn into a drum. So is there benefit? Yeah, I think so. But I would put the world's cheapest insulation.
Some more of that white fiberglass meant to go above your garage. Super cheap insulation.
Even if you just filled it with, like, you went to the thrift store and got towels,
right?
that were like really cheap, like you could buy by the pound. That was cheaper than insulation. Just throw that in there.
I bet that white fiberglass is even cheaper than that.
It probably is
dirt cheap, but yeah. I mean that's all we're talking about. So if you can get a pile of that white fiberglass insulation, I'd go ahead and fill that riser with it for sure.
He says, if you're going to install floor-to-ceiling corner bass traps, but only in 2 of the room's corners, not 4, does it make a difference whether it's the 2 front corners versus the 2 back corners? No. It does make me wonder where you're putting your subwoofers, to be honest with you. That's the question you have. Because I thought you were going to say the front left and the back right, or vice versa. But yeah, just make sure you got your subwoofers placed properly. But yeah, I don't think it makes much of a difference.
You might be using mid of the front wall, mid of the back wall for the subs.
Well, then why can't you put it in all four corners? Would be my.
I don't know.
I would suspect a door. I would suspect.
As far as overall room reverberation in affecting those frequencies, it's not going to make a difference. No. However, clearly if you have them in the two front corners, it might be fairly close to where your front left and right speakers go, depending on what your setup is and exactly how wide your room is and how wide your screen is and all that stuff. But it might be the case that your front speakers end up with their backs pretty close to the two front corner bass traps. That could have an impact on the sound as far as the speaker boundary interference goes. So it could have an impact there. It would almost certainly be a beneficial as far as the measured results that would come out of that. So if you're trying to kill two birds with one stone, your room isn't super wide, your screen is fairly wide, so your front left and right speakers are going to be somewhat close to those two front corners. Then if you have floor to ceiling bass traps, corner bass traps in the two front corners, you're also going to take care of some of the speaker boundary interference that might happen there.
There you go. Infinite Gary. Gary came across an article at Simple Home Cinema describing how the author has chosen to set up Audyssey dynamic EQ and dynamic volume. The author has plenty of praise for the Audyssey's version of loudness compensation and curves of equal loudness, pointing out how house curves are not volume dependent and how you have to create many different house curves if you listen within a range of different volume levels. But the author describes how he has settled on always applying dynamic volume to low with dynamic EQ on, but with a reference level offset of 5. Gary gave those settings a try since he's always just had dynamic EQ on with no reference level offset and dynamic volume off, which seems to have always been our recommendation. Sure enough, the presentation sounded a bit different, as one would expect, with certain instruments sounds that were barely audible before now standing out. However, other sounds seemed dulled by comparison. So are the author's suggested settings just personal preference and nothing more? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is exactly what dynamic volume would do, which is that it takes sounds that are very quiet and makes them a bit louder, and takes sounds that are very loud and quieter.
And then the offset, all that does is just stop. It just lowers when dynamic EQ kicks in.
That means that in the case of setting the reference level offset for dynamic EQ to 5, it means that it isn't doing anything until the master volume is at least minus 5.5. It has to be below minus 5 before dynamic EQ starts to do anything in that setup with the reference level offset set to 5. If he had set the reference level offset to 10, then dynamic EQ wouldn't kick in until the master volume were turned down to minus 10.5 or lower. So when you leave the reference level offset at its default of 0, it means as soon as you turn the master volume down below 0 on the master volume dial, then dynamic EQ starts to do something. So those recommended settings, I mean, if that's what the author likes, I got no beef with it, but it is by no means technically more correct in some way or something. Dynamic EQ is always a bit of a compromise. Dynamic volume is definitely a compromise. Do I feel like it has useful purposes sometimes? Absolutely. My parents, for sure, my mom hates it when the music kicks in a TV show or a movie and it's so much louder than the dialogue, which happens all the time, right? You hear that when the needle drops in and the music is so much louder in a lot of movies and TV shows. It just bugs the heck out of her. So on their receiver, I have dynamic volume activated at the medium setting, not even the low setting. She much prefers it. She enjoys watching things more because she doesn't have to ride the volume dial or volume button on the remote control. So do I consider that useful and a good thing overall? Absolutely I do. Is it technically correct? No, it's a compromise. So that's the author's personal preference. I've no beef with it, but it's certainly not something where well, that's what they said, so I have to do that in my system too.
Right. Brandon asks if we can settle an internet flame war.
Of course. What else would we do?
All right. Nothing bad ever happened from this. In an enclosed room that is 16 by 14 by 10, or 2240 cubic feet of air volume, could a single SVS PB1000 Pro reach full reference volume? Could duals? How much more output would actually be provided, and how much louder are dual PB1000 Pros versus a single if they are not co-located? You would be shocked how far away you have to be for two subwoofers not to be co-located. I've seen this so many times
depending on the
before.
Frequency, of course. But
Yeah. I've seen this so many times before. People are like, they told me I was only going to get this amount of boost in my output, but I'm getting this amount. And I'm like, those subs are functionally on top of each other.
Right.
I mean, they don't look like it because they're on either side of your center channel, but they are functionally on top of each other. So not being co-located, I want you to or whoever is talking about this, they must be across the room from each other as far away as possible, like one corner to the other corner. And that is the only thing I will accept as not co-located, because, especially when you get down to 20 hertz, those are like 55-foot long wavelengths.
Yeah, and you'd have to be
in a 16 by 14 by 10 foot room, up down, it is bouncing 5.5 times before it resolves one single wave.
Yes, that's right.
Let's be serious here. That is those are two co-located subwoofers. But
of course,
at that point.
Up at 80 hertz, then
Yes.
now we're maybe having enough separation if they're in diagonally opposite corners. But just to answer the question directly, we've got the 2-meter ground plane CEA 2010 measurements that show that a single PB1000 Pro at 20 hertz outputs just over 101 decibels. Now that's outdoors. From 2 meters away, it's able to put out 101 decibels. Now, everything at 25 hertz or higher, it can output 107 decibels. So as soon as you bring that subwoofer into any room, particularly a small room like this, because under 2,500 cubic feet is definitely a small room, acoustic speaking, you're going to have at least a 6 decibel gain just by bringing that subwoofer into the room.
Right.
So at 25 hertz and above, by having 6 decibels more, you're at 113 decibels that it could put out at 25 hertz and above. Now, is that the full 115 that is allowed within reference volume? Well, not quite, but it is above 110. Reference volume says that the bass from the low frequency effects channel should be 110 to 115. So we have hit over 110 with a single PB1000 Pro at 25 hertz and above. Now, if it's 107 decibels at 20 hertz, we're slightly below the reference level, volume level threshold of 110 in this room. Now that's, 2 meters away inside of this room, and it's not really going to make much difference because acoustically speaking at 20 hertz, that sound is bouncing around a gazillion times before it actually gets to your ears. But if we brought in the second subwoofer, and if we even considered that somehow it's not co-located, which effectively it would be, and would give you about another 6 decibels down at 20 hertz by bringing in that second PB1000 Pro. But let's just say you only get the 3 decibel gain by having 2 sound sources that are not co-located. Well, we just hit 110. We just hit slightly more than 110. It started at slightly more than 101, and now we've added 6 decibels by bringing it into the room and another 3 decibels at least by adding the second subwoofer. So we have hit full reference volume. So by the math, by every very conservative interpretation of the math and how much gain you would be getting from the room, the second sub, measuring it outdoors at 2 meters away, in this size room with these dimensions, dual PB1000 Pros would definitely be hitting at least the minimum spec of full reference volume for the low frequency effects channels all the way down to 20 hertz. And at 25 hertz and above, easily hitting it.
There you go. Solved. Brandon's own theater area is small, but it's open to the rest of his house, so it's not small. He's currently using a pair of Ascend Sierra RAL towers positioned to either side of his fireplace, with the new Sierra RAL Horizon Center just added. There's a TV mounted above the fireplace, and a roll-down acoustically transparent projection screen that can lower down in front of all of that. The Horizon Center is huge and actually partially blocks the fireplace. As a result, the fireplace is rarely used, but the center would have to be moved when it is. He loves the sound quality of the Ascend Sierra RAL front speakers, and he loves that the Horizon Center uses the exact same drivers and has the same output capabilities as towers. He definitely wants to stick with towers no matter what, even though I'm going to tell him not to. His surrounds are... People are starting to really ask questions knowing what I'm going to say,
Yeah.
and I resent that. I'm going to be honest with you. I resent it, and I don't approve. His surrounds are in-wall Golden Ear MPX speakers, and his overheads need to be mounted within the base of his plank ceiling, so he's got Golden Ear supersats up there. The timbre match is less than perfect, as you would expect, and he definitely preferred to replace the Golden Ear speakers, both the in-wall surrounds and the on-ceiling overheads, but Ascend doesn't have their own in-walls, and he isn't sure about mounting any of Ascend models within the base of his ceiling. He knows we've suggested Sonance to go along with Ascend. Those could work for the in-walls, but they don't seem to have on-walls that would match. Do we have a suggestion, or should he consider replacing all of his speakers, including the front 3 Ascends, so they can have the best possible timbre match all around? He definitely wouldn't mind a wedge-shaped model for the overheads, and a very capable, but not as tall center would physically fit a lot better up front. So that led him to considering the CAFs. They have every form factor he needs, and the concentric mid-range plus tweeter design would allow for a shorter center that still matches his towers. What do we think? Well, Ascend are really going for exceedingly neutral speakers.
Yes.
When you said you could go with angled speakers, I mean, the first thing, of course, I thought of was the prime elevations, which are angled, are neutral, and in fact, about anything from any of the SVS speakers would work here. Now, they don't have in-walls either, so that currently doesn't help you on that front. And yes, we have suggested these other speakers, the Sonance and some others that would work here.
I would kind of say, like, for overhead speakers.
Oh my God, Rob! Look at all these links.
I gave a bunch of. I gave a bunch of options.
I'm going to go to the
they're all
bathroom.
similar.
Let me know when you're done.
For the overhead speakers, I'm not going to care about the timbre match very much at all. For the surrounds, I can understand it. I'm certainly willing to consider trying for a better timbre match there. And it's like, I would have to say, like, the Sonance in-wall, in-ceiling speakers, they are a really good timbre match for Ascend's signature series for sure. For the Dome tweeter model speakers, I'm not necessarily going to say that they're a completely perfect match for the RAL Ribbon tweeters. Now, again, because they're all going for neutral, they are more similar than different, but if you were a very critical listener and you're able to pick out some differences between the fronts and the surrounds, it's like, I'm not necessarily going to point you at Sonance's in-walls to go with the RAL Ribbon tweeter speakers from Ascend. So where I am going to point you is Focal. Again, the timbre matches here, if you had them A/B compared up at the front of your room, isn't necessarily going to be a perfect timbre match, but this is one where they're much more similar than different. And if you were to go with the in-wall 300 series, the IW6 from Focal, which is available at Accessories for Less for a pretty hefty price. They're going for $600 each at Accessories for Less. They're $800 each if you're buying them brand new from, say, Crutchfield or something like that, who does sell them. But $600 each, it's more than certainly the HTM 200 SEs or some of the Sonance in-wall models, but it's less expensive than trying to, say, rig some Sierra Lunas or Sierra Duos inside the walls. So that's one that I feel pretty comfortable recommending, the IW6s. Now, they do have from Focal fully fire-rated metal back cans that I would certainly recommend. They have the stuffing built in, so that would be a pretty good choice there. Now, the back cans, if you're buying them, Accessories for Less, I don't see them selling them. I do see them over at Crutchfield for $190 each, which is a bit excessive. So maybe just look at the dimensions, make your own backer boxes for the Focal IW6s for your surrounds. For the overheads, if you just want to stick with everything Focal, they do have 300 series on walls, which would be ridiculous overkill for your overhead Atmos speakers. But if you want a form factor that's very similar to your Golden Ear Supersats and you want to keep everything in the Focal 300 series, it can be done. They do have their Focal 300 series on-wall speaker that goes for, $800 each, the 301, which is it's ridiculous to consider that as your overhead speaker, but I'll throw it out there in case you're really, really wondering about it. They do also have a on-wall speaker from their Cora series that goes for $340 each over at Accessories for Less, and again, tack on about $200 more than that if you're buying it brand new. That could be a more reasonable solution, although it is pretty much just a keyhole mount on the back of that. So rigging that to your ceiling, I'm not totally sure about. What I do like from Focal are some of their satellite speaker options. They have their Dome speaker, which replaced the old Bird speakers. They're way more expensive. The Dome Flax, even at Accessories for Less, is $520 each, which to me, again, is ridiculous for a satellite speaker that you're going to be attaching for Atmos purposes. What makes a little bit more sense to me than the Dome speakers, which I consider pretty overpriced, would be the SIB Evo speakers. You can get those brand new from Crutchfield for $500 a pair, which in the price ranges that you're talking about is not completely unreasonable, and those can be wall mounted. It all comes in the package. They're bigger than you might think, but the SIB Evo speakers would definitely be one that you could attach to your ceiling and aim and swivel however you want to. There's also a way that you could get the Focal Dome, the original ones, not the Flax ones, or the SIB Evo speakers. Accessories for Less offers both of those in 5.1 packages that come with 5 of them and a little subwoofer that's packed in. Whether you go with the SIB Evos or the Focal Dome, first generation, it's $1,000 for the 5.1 package, which would mean if you're using just 4 of them out of there, it's the same price as getting the SIB Evos brand new from Crutchfield. So I think those are good options if you want to go that way, have everything matching and a really good timbre match. That said, if you decided to go everything with the KEF series to get something that's sort of, in my opinion, similar sound quality to your RAL Sierra speakers up front, you definitely want to go with like the R series from KEF. I don't think the Q series quite comes up to that same level. They're a good contemporary for the Signature series, but I think you'd want to get to KEF's R series for your front speakers. But using the Q series, particularly for the overheads, if you want to use the Wedge Q series speakers for the overheads and then in-wall Q series speakers for the surrounds, that is a solution that I can get behind, but it does of course mean that you're swapping out your front Sierra RAL speakers that you already know you love. So 2 options there from me, and myself, I'd probably get the Focals to go along with the Sierra RALs.
Yeah, there's no world in which I'm going to suggest that you replace those front speakers. I know the center channel is annoyingly large for you, but and this is a self-preservation thing on my part, maybe our part, is that when you know you like something, us saying get something else, I love the tide coming in. It's fantastic.
That must be the furnace kicking on over here.
Okay, but it just comes through a lot.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's coming through and
it's
louder
not showing
and louder.
up in my waveform, but whatever.
That's good. Maybe if you guys
maybe it's just a Skype thing.
I apologize. Yeah, it probably is just a Skype thing. But since you already have speakers you like, you should definitely stick with them. I mean, especially speakers at this price point. And with this quality, because even if we could suggest something that you would be happy to get, and that it would sound, in theory, be a better quality, chances are you're going to get them home and just be like, maybe they sound better. I don't know, and that's not what we want. That doesn't make anybody happy. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'm reading online, people are like, I upgraded from the PB 1000 to the SB 3000, spent 3 times as much or 2 times as much or whatever it is, and I guess it sounds better. And I'm like, exactly, that's exactly what I would expect. But people online will tell you it's a night and day difference. It's night and day. There's no difference. I mean, only an idiot wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And so therefore you are the idiot. Bertrand finally built his corner bass traps. Congrats. I have no idea what you're talking about. He says it took about 20 hours to shop, cut, assemble, and wrap his 12 triangular bass trap modules. Each is 29 inches tall, so he can stack 3 in each corner. Oh, okay. So he's got MDF on the bottom and the top, it looks like. And just like 1 by, or maybe 2 by, or something like that. Corners, for the corners there. And he looks like he chopped them maybe so that they're triangular as well. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, really nice. I really like these.
So, and then I guess he stacked it up inside, and it's it's not the white fluffy stuff. It's
this is rock wool. Rock wool cut into triangles, very neatly so as well.
Yeah, it's really, dude. I'm gonna come chop some onions at my house because my dude, they're very nice. So lots of pictures here, and you can see it does sort of make the room look a little bit more enclosed, because it's not a very big room to begin with, and
it's a small room for sure.
He's got them shoved in the corners there, so it does give it a more, let's call it, intimate feeling. So Anyways, he watched the movie right away without having rerun Audyssey. He couldn't say he immediately noticed a huge difference, but it was his first time watching that movie, so no real frame of reference. Then he reran Audyssey, and he's afraid he thinks it now sounds worse than before. He wonders if he did something wrong. He isn't totally sure how to describe the difference, but he thinks his whole system now sounds brighter. Putting the bass traps in the corners did mean readjusting the positioning of his front towers. All of his speakers are Martin Logan's Motion series. Could it be that having the difference in the positioning and tone of his front, left, and right speakers could be the issue here? He just finds it puzzling because, like he said, prior to rerunning Audyssey, he didn't notice such a big change in the system. So it seemed to be the combination of having added the bass traps and also running Audyssey again. Can we help him improve his situation? I mean, the first thing I'd do is rerun Audyssey. That would be the first thing I would do, to be honest with you.
But, I mean, having the system sound brighter than it did before is not unexpected because you just put in a whole bunch of bass trapping.
That's right.
So any bass reverberation that you used to have in this room that you might have interpreted as, oh, it sounds fuller, it sounds warmer, but having that extra bit of bass reverberation was masking some of the higher frequency detail. That's all been cleaned up now by those bass traps. So having the overall presentation sound a bit brighter, not necessarily unexpected because you've just lowered all of the bass reverberation by having these big corner bass traps in there. So, I mean, this might be a situation where you're going to want to bust out that Audyssey editor app, and maybe you are putting in a little bit more of a bass boost. One thing I would say in this particular setup is I wouldn't necessarily go strictly by the original subwoofer setting when you begin Audyssey and it hasn't even started the chirp tone measurements yet, when it just has you set the subwoofer levels. In order to proceed, you have to be in the green level, but as soon as you get past that, I might boost the volume level on subwoofer a bit extra and then let Audyssey do its thing, because having the gain turned up on the subs in this case is going to make a lot more sense. So could it also be from adjusting the toe in on your speakers with those
Absolutely.
Martin Logan Motion Series speakers? Absolutely.
Yeah, those are very directional.
They are very directional speakers with a bit of a high frequency tilt if you're directly on axis. So if you're just finding that the presentation now is a little bit too sharp, too harsh in the upper frequencies, basically aiming your front, left, and right speakers straight forward might be what you want to do now. That might sound more pleasing to you once you do that. So this is like, it's some tinkering with your setup. That's what needs to happen here. I think what you'll discover, though, is that when you measure with your EQ Wizard, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, the RT60 times on my bass around the crossover region, that all improved, or at least it lowered. Whether you consider that an improvement subjectively is a question mark, but you're going to see that the RT60 times around your crossover region lowered.
Right. I need to write something down because I just got an idea for an article. But you may be thinking to yourself, this is both for I'm scrolling up to see his name because I forgot who I was talking to, Bertrand, and anybody else who's listening to this. You may be thinking, why did I do this work to get rid of this bass?
Yup.
if you're then going to tell me to turn the bass back up, I will point you to something that makes maybe a little bit more sense to you. Okay. Why do you use unsalted butter or reduced salt chicken stock when you are cooking? Is it because you don't want salt in things? No. It's because you want the right amount of salt in things, right? I cook with unsalted butter and I get as little salt possible in my stocks when I buy them. I make them myself as well, but when I buy them, I get as little salt as possible in my stocks. Why? Because I want to be able to control it. I want to be able to control it exactly. Okay, I don't want something else to determine how much salt is in my dishes. I want to taste it and say, that's not enough. I'm going to add a little bit more. Okay, it's easier to add that salt than it is to take that salt away. And that is the case with bass as well. Bass in your home theater is very hard to control, especially when it's doing its own thing. So as you put these bass traps in, you are reducing these, like Rob said, these reverberation times, the amount of bass that's being reinforced throughout the room. You're cutting all that down. So when you adjust the bass in your subwoofer, or you adjust the curve on the Audyssey editor app, or any of these things, what you're doing is being able to be a lot more precise with exactly what you're hearing. You're not, you're not cranking it up just a little bit, and all of a sudden, what was a bass bump is now like a bass mountain in your main listening position. So it's very important that we understand what you're doing with these bass trapping is you're giving yourself the ability to control exactly how much bass is in the room. And remember, I think Andrew wrote an article on AV Gadgets called something like "Is Different Better" or something like that. I'll find it and link it up. But the idea there is, if when you hear something that is different, does that make it better or worse? Well, it takes time for you to really understand that because you're so used to what the original was. So you may, like with some people who are going from TV speakers to literally anything else, including a sound bar, they're like, this is so much better. This is just the best thing I've ever heard. Whereas you may say, oh, no, that's not better, and this is all the things that are wrong with it because you have more experience. Now that you're going from a room that you were fairly familiar with to a room that has a much more bass trapping and things are sounding a little bit deader, it's like very akin to when we talk to people who have just gotten their second subwoofer and they say, what happened to my bass? Like, I used to have bass, and I no longer have bass.
What you said about, a movie you haven't watched before, it's not as though you watch that movie and go, oh, there's no bass in this movie. It's that, by comparison, once you recalibrated and then played some content you were familiar with the bass traps in there, you're hearing what seems like a brighter presentation, less bass, less reverberation in the bass. By comparison, you're noticing it on the content you were familiar with. So nothing unexpected there. And yeah, I like what Tom said about being able to control now manually exactly how much you want to have in there.
Right. So I don't want you to feel like you wasted your time or your money.
It made a difference.
It made a difference. And in home theater, making an audible difference like this is like the hardest thing to do once you get to a certain level. And you've done it. So you should be fine with it. I do think you need to play with the positioning of your speakers. I think you need to go through the toe-in process again.
Yep.
I'm going to forget to link all these articles up that I'm talking about, but there is one how to get the perfect toe-in on AV Gadgets, which will talk about how I go through it. We've talked about it here many times, but we're not going to go through it again right now. You do need to go through the toe-in process again. Make sure that, and two-channel is the best way to do that, at least for your left and right speakers, which are probably most of your problem here. And then, just start really dialing in the bass to be exactly what you want it to be. Maybe give yourself a little bit of a bass boost in that 40 to 80 hertz range, where it's that kick you in the chest bass that you're like, I want to feel it a little bit more. Bump it up right there, baby, because now you can without it affecting everything else really negatively. So I think that not seeing these differences as being bad is a really important first step, so that you can now start tweaking the way that most people cannot. Ilango needs help finalizing his plans for his newly renovated family room. It's roughly 15 by 17 feet, but has a large permanent openings to the entire rest of the house. Plans are in place for a dedicated home theater in the basement in the future, so not to worry. My dude, I was not worried. They just want the nicest family room experience they can create given the room and aesthetic considerations. Hidden in-wall speakers are the top choice. Extremely thin on-walls might be doable. The seating placement is not going to change, and the TV, a new 77-inch LG C2 OLED, is going above the gas fireplace. He wants a 5.1.4 or 5.2.4 configuration. Already has plans for 2 pairs of Sonos Mag 6 in-ceiling speakers on hand for overhead Atmos speakers. Holy crap.
It's a little bit hard to see in the diagram.
I see it now.
Reginald living room right in the middle there. TV is on the right above a fireplace in the diagram. So the seating thing is described in the text below. So he's got a lot going on here. Anyways, I guess there's going to be in the text here, but if he doesn't explain it well enough for me, I will re-explain it for you. There will be an L-shaped couch against the right side wall, which is not the right that Rob was talking about. So is the bottom of the diagram, but assuming that you call your TV the front wall,
so now
L-shaped couch against the right side wall.
Right. So the TV's on the front, on the right wall, in the back right corner will be an L-shaped couch, with the short end of the L shape against the back wall. That short end of the L shape is that has the only seat that's directly facing the fireplace and TV. So that's where he'll sit, and what he will consider to be the primary seat, which will be 16 feet from ice to screen. It's at the very end of that small L-shaped part of the couch.
Yeah. It's
directly in front of the TV. He's sitting there with his arm on the armrest, and everybody else can suck it. And the long part is on the right wall in relation to the TV. He says, what's the maximum height from the floor to the center of the TV he should consider for that seating position and distance? He needs to plan for the mount above the fireplace. So we've talked about sort of your resting eye level, and you have told us that you'll have an L-shaped fireplace, but what you have not told us is whether or not it reclines, whether or not you sit up.
Yeah, I certainly don't think those seats look like recliners.
They don't, but this is all stock crap. Who knows what this is? You know, he could. My parents have an L-shaped, just like this actually, and the ends do recline. So and then there's the ottoman for like all the middle seats. So I don't know if things are reclining or not, but when you consider your resting eye line, you cannot just consider from the distance from the floor to where your eyes will be and then put that in the TV right in the middle of that, because that's not where your resting eye line is. Your resting eye line it is absolutely dictated by the position of your neck and your shoulders and your head and everything else.
But so, I like in general, I don't want you like putting this TV against the ceiling, right? So THX's recommendation is that the top of the image is not more than 15 degrees above that resting eye line. So wherever your resting eye line lands on the front wall, 15 degrees above that would be the top of the image. So I'm going to play it conservative, right? And basically say that with the 77-inch OLED, which is itself 39 inches tall for its image, if you had the bottom of the TV about 4 feet from the ground, that's the bottom of the TV, so that would be the middle of the TV is about 5 feet from the ground, and then the bottom of the TV is about 4 feet from the ground. Like, that's going to put you in the ballpark of about as high as I would want to go, assuming your resting eye line is like 36 to 40 inches off of the ground, which is pretty typical if you're basically looking straight forward. You know, if you are reclined and looking up, it could be a little bit higher than that. But I mean, what I'm getting at is if the TV is 4 feet off the ground and then the TV is almost 40 inches tall, right? Like, you're not leaving yourself a ton of extra room until you hit the ceiling anyway, if it were an 8-foot tall ceiling. I think this ceiling is actually taller than 8 feet, but regardless, like, I think that's sort of the ballpark for the maximum height that I would be looking at is from the floor to the bottom of the TV, about 4 feet, from the floor to the middle of the TV, about 5 feet.
Right. Again, we have talked about it on this podcast before, but mantle mount is a very popular solution.
Yeah, to be able to pull the TV forward and down in front of the fireplace when you're using it. So that might be a consideration too. That way you could mount it considerably higher, but when you're actually watching the TV, it would pull forward and down. That would also bring the TV a little bit closer to you and give you a little bit larger field of view too.
So what in-wall speakers should you get for the left, center, right, and surrounds? You'd like to keep the price under $500 each if possible, but only if good solutions, but only if
the only good.
If the only good solutions cost more, up to $1,000 each, you can still work with that. If they're available in Canada, so much the better, although shipping from the States is not a big problem. What do we suggest that can handle this open room size and seating distance?
I have one suggestion.
Well, I can see what it is here, so I'm not going to suggest anything else. I am going to say that, and I mean this with all love and respect and everything else, I think you're being way too optimistic? No. Aggressive? No. Something like that in here. Like if it were me, I would stick at 5.1 or 5.2 and call it a day. You know what I mean? You're up against a back wall, right? Mm-hmm. So the overhead speakers, at best, you're doing top fronts and top middles.
That's his future question. So
you know, if it were me, I would be like, if you came to me and said, should I go stereo or Atmos, I would say stereo. If you say 5.1 or Atmos, I'd say 5.1. If you say 5.1 or 5.2 or or stereo, I would be hard pressed to tell you the answer that I would be okay with, because I think that there's a very good case to be made for both. I think this is just, you're going to be spending a lot of money on speakers that are not, in my opinion, going to make your experience all that much better because of all the other things that are going to be wrong.
He
with
already
the room.
bought the overheads though, so
I understand.
I'm not
but you know what? Whole house audio is a thing, right? Put a couple of them in the kitchen, a couple of them someplace else. You don't have to use them in here. But go ahead. What's your suggestion, Ron?
Yeah, for the front, the left, center, right, and the surround speakers, I'm going to suggest HSU's HIW1 in-wall speakers. They do, thankfully, finally sell them as singles now. So once you add the shipping in there, you're looking at about $200 each. That would be shipping them to an address in the States, which he says he has. He says it's easy enough for him to ship to an address in the States and then just drive across the border himself and pick them up. So you'd be looking about $200 each, which is definitely within the budget that you've specified. And yeah, a little bit of hassle going across the border to pick them up. But yeah, HSU's HIW1, it is a horn-loaded speaker, so for the distance that you've got, the open room, having that higher efficiency is definitely going to be a bonus. Make yourself some backer boxes. Doesn't have to be difficult. About 1 cubic feet of internal space is what you want there, and that's what I would go with all day long.
Given that the right wall is an existing exterior wall, he isn't certain at this point whether an in-wall speaker can be installed there. He might have to consider an on-wall solution for his surrounds. Any suggestions if that is the case? Right. So this would be a case where I may suggest that instead of doing that, I mean, because the obvious solution Rob is going to give you, which is another horn-loaded speaker, which can be installed there as an on-wall, because there are options that are out there. But this might be a case where you might just go ahead and build a box around your in-wall speaker so that you have matching all the way around.
Yeah, a little false column there. Also, yeah. I mean, honestly, in this setup, if you had the surround right speaker actually on the back wall,
yes,
and the surround left speaker on, the corner of the left side wall, like, yeah, I know that looks a little bit weird, but it's all going to be camouflaged. You're going to paint the grills. It's all going to blend in. And like in this setup, that's not going to make a tremendous difference. So you can get around having that in-wall speaker in the exterior wall by just having it in the back wall, which is a party wall. So clearly that would have an opening in it.
Right.
The other one is,
but
if
you have
do
a suggestion.
Yeah, if you do want the on wall, then Klipsch's on walls as surround speakers would be totally fine. In this room, I would err on the side of getting the slightly larger model, the RP240D. They go for 550 Canadian dollars each if you're buying them in Canada, which is crazy expensive. But you only have to get a pair of them. So
definitely get the 2 HSUs and have somebody build you a cabinet for
less. That's right. That's right.
He says, with the seating pushed back against the walls, where should his 4 Atmos speakers go, and what should he label them? He should label them Zone 2 and Zone 3 and put them in other rooms. I really don't feel like you should be putting Atmos speakers in this space. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I bet you. If you do, you basically have a pair more or less directly overhead. Get them about 1.5 feet away from the back wall if you can, but more or less directly overhead, and then another pair that's about 5 feet in front of those. And I would probably label them as front heights and top middles in that scenario.
Yeah. Subwoofers need to work with the aesthetic too. In-wall subs would be best if possible. The SVS 3000 micros could potentially work since they're so small. SVS's forthcoming in-wall sub would probably be even better. Could the in-wall sub go in the wall directly behind his primary seat? How much clearance would it need? Would it need between the in-wall sub and the back of the couch? There's almost certainly something in the specs of the subwoofer that will tell you something like that. But the couch itself is more of a sort of a sound absorber. It's not like you're putting a bookcase in front of it. And honestly, if it were me, I would very much consider just putting it right behind the couch anyways, just so that you can hear it, feel it. It would physically shake the couch a little bit, hopefully. So yeah, I think I'd be okay with this placement, even if it does compromise the sound, because it's gonna have compromised sound. It's just not gonna.
I would also consider, if you're willing to, for the price. Like, it looks like, again, they might be facing some slightly different directions, but it looks like you could put an in-wall sub in each of the 4 corners of this room. Which, if you're willing to do that for the price, I would do that. Some of them might be firing sideways, some of them might be firing front to back, but that's not going to make any difference for the subwoofer. So I would consider having one in each corner.
That sounds cheap.
I know. But he saved money on the speakers.
Not that much.
Some.
All right, we'll do Michael last here. Michael's pretty long question, so it looks like we're going over 2 hours. God, this is a long question. Michael asks, does Audyssey's dynamic EQ affect all the bass frequencies or only the bass below the crossover point? All of it.
All of it. It affects all speakers, including the subwoofer. It'll work if you don't have any subwoofers. If you say, I have no subwoofers, dynamic EQ still has an impact. So all the bass frequencies.
That's right. I'll try to... I don't know. Maybe I won't link it up. I've already forgotten. If you use the Audyssey Editor app to manually draw your own target curve, does that override the reference curve in the AV receiver, or does selecting the reference setting in the AV receiver itself always use Audyssey's reference target curve? I actually just published an article this week. Today, actually. Is that right? Or is it yesterday? Today, which is Audyssey flat versus reference. And it explains this. So I'll let Rob do it so you can hear Rob's explanation.
If you use the Audyssey Editor app, so you have to make sure you've run the measurement, you've redrawn your target curve as you want, you've clicked the Done button that is unintuitively placed in the upper left-hand corner of the app, and then you have uploaded what you have done to your AV receiver. That will now take the place of the reference setting, and only the reference setting. So if you set it manually in your AV receiver to flat after that point, or the front left right bypass, which you should never use, but if you did it to either of those settings, those would be the default target curves that came from Audyssey, but the reference setting has now been replaced by what you drew in the Audyssey Editor app.
So why are the choices for the crossover frequency always even, whole numbers, and typically in 10 or 20 hertz increments? That doesn't actually track with any musical notes or give you even spacing between the selections, since, for example, 40 to 80 hertz is an entire octave, but 80 to 120 hertz is only half an octave. Because I think that's it's all about speaker performance, and when the speaker is coming down to a certain level, right? And arbitrarily somebody came up with 80 hertz is really good for where it's great to cross over into your subwoofers because of localization. But then not all speakers could hit that for one reason or another because of their size. So they're like, okay, well, this very popular speaker hit 120 hertz, so we'll make sure we put one in there for that. And I mean, that would be my reading of this. I just think it's just sort of how
I think you hit the word exactly. It was arbitrary because mean, you're absolutely right. If we're like saying the frequencies are specific notes, they're going to be decimal places as far as what the hertz are. It's not going to be just in 10 or 20 hertz increments. And you're absolutely right.
It's also not a brick wall either. That's the thing to remember. It's a crossover. There's some above, some below, and everything's playing everything. So to have it be a very, very specific number based on a note, first of all, would be confusing. Everybody would wonder why it has to be this one stupid frequency.
But I mean, he's got a point.
I'm not saying you're not. I'm not saying you don't have a point. I'm just saying some things are just the way they are because they are the way they are. It's like engines are often given in whole, like maybe not whole numbers, but not the exact decimal points they should be, right? The size of your engine isn't like a 3.6 liter 3.6544 liter engine. It is 3.6. Why? Because
it is the thing of like, if you did what I described for Infinite Gary last week, you're setting up a 2.1 system that doesn't have any bass management. You're trying to decide where you're setting the crossover for just the subwoofer, so you're playing the bass sweeps through just the speakers by themselves and trying to determine where the speaker starts to sound uneven from seat to seat or even just in your single seat. And you're like, okay, with this speaker I get down to 60 hertz, so I set the crossover for my subwoofer to 70 hertz or 80 hertz or something like that. If it turns out that the speaker starts to sound uneven or can only play down to 100 hertz, setting this crossover to 110 or 120 is not nearly as much above that 100 hertz as 70 hertz is above 60 hertz. When you're down in the lower frequencies, going up by 10 hertz is a greater number of notes that you've gone up. The pitch is considerably higher at 70 hertz versus 60 hertz, whereas the pitch at 110 hertz versus 100 hertz is barely any higher. So it's a good point there. I think it was purely arbitrary and they just went for round numbers and just left it at that.
So in my AV Gadgets article, which was called "Is Room Correction Actually Important for Your Home Theater?" I laid out 3 potential room scenarios: large and open, dedicated but untreated, or dedicated and treated. But what about a 4th scenario that Michael falls into, open and treated? His theater area is open to his dining room and kitchen, plus the stairs to the upper floor, but he's put GIK soffit and bass traps, plus 8 4-inch thick panels and 2 2-inch thick panels. So by my logic, would room correction be worth it? And the reason I didn't include your scenario is because I don't know. I don't know that anybody could know, to be honest with you, because so many variables there are just, well, first of all, your room is very unusual. I don't think I think as highly treated as your space is, and to be also open is unusual. Most people don't have any treatments, or they have tons of treatments and a door.
Right.
It's there's very little like crossover between those.
Like, I would have to think in Michael's room that the reverberation times are a little bit lower than if he had no treatments whatsoever.
Sure.
But it's not going to have the same level of predictable control as if you were in a dedicated enclosed room. So you are in this very difficult to predict middle ground. I think that's what's going on there. I think the point of Tom's article was what I've summarized in the past by just saying we always consider the room control to be the cherry on top. It is not the panacea. It is not the fix-all. It's not the I can bring this AV receiver and any speakers I want into any room with any sort of acoustic environment, and it's gonna fix the room because it's room correction. We're like, no. Everything to do with reverberation time, the AV receiver and the room correction can't do anything about that. Once the sound leaves the speaker, the room takes control, and however long that sound is going to reverberate, you can make it quieter coming out of the speaker to begin with than what the signal asked for, because you know it's going to reverberate in this room after you've measured it. But that's all that the room correction can do. It can make it a little bit quieter when it first comes out, or a little bit louder when it first comes out. But the reverberation, that's where the acoustic treatments do all of the work, and the room correction does virtually none of the work. So in your scenario, you've almost certainly created a better acoustic environment than if you had nothing in there at all, because with nothing in there at all, it would probably like audibly echo, an actual like reverb that you would be able to tell just with your ears. So you've probably knocked that down some. I would say, room correction is if you have good room correction, it's not likely to make things worse in your scenario. It might make things a little bit better in some certain areas, but it's not going to be a fix-all. It never is going to be a fix-all.
Right. Yeah. I have been in, I won't say similar rooms, but I've been in rooms that have had room treatments and been open, and it's just it's so hard to know how the sound is going to interact with all the different spaces and stuff that are in there. And that's why, I didn't include your type of room because I think it's uncommon, but in all honesty, I don't know. I think it may make things a little bit better. Certainly on the higher end, I would think like the top frequencies, it could do quite a bit of work, but in the bass, I think you've done as much as you can, but I don't know how much you can actually do if that bass is, bouncing out of the room and then right back in. Remember, 20 hertz, 55 feet long. It is going. Yeah. It is moving. And it's coming back eventually. When he looks at the before measurements for his front 3 speakers, Ascend Sierra 2s, according to Audyssey, he sees a gnarly dip just above 100 hertz, and again around 200 hertz. More so in the measurement for a center channel than his front left and right speakers. He has GIK 244 panels behind his front left and right, but nothing behind his center. Would it be better to switch those panels to the thinner GIK 242, or do we have a recommendation on how to address those dips? Or are they actually not bad enough to be a big concern? So we take a look at it here. For the most part, they are dipping around 7 to 10, maybe 9 dB, if I'm reading this correctly.
The front left and right ones, I'm not super concerned about those. That is something where EQ
I can scroll down long enough.
help you out a bit. in the front left and right. And if anything, this is an indication that those thicker panels placed behind your front left and right speakers are helping, because the center, that does not have the 4-inch thick panel behind it, has worse response. Similar, we're seeing dips in the same frequencies, but considerably worse center versus the front left and right. So I wouldn't be trying to make the panels behind the front left and right speakers thinner so that they look more like the center. I would be trying to find a way to put something behind that center so it looks more like the front left and right, because the center definitely has the worst response versus the front left and right. The front left and right, those are looking good enough that I'm not super worried about it. So I think if you can find a way to put a 4-inch panel behind your center speaker somehow, that would be the way to address this.
Yeah, for those of you that can't see the images, the front left and right are dipping. Like I said, I think the left is only about 6 to 8 dB, and then the right is,
I mean, maybe 9 at the worst
maybe
of
9
it, but
at
it's
the
pretty
worst.
narrow.
But the center is 10
point.
and 15.
Yeah.
So yeah, putting some more absorption behind there may help. We don't,
I don't think it would hurt, and I don't think going less behind the left and right is the solution at all.
So Michael has noticed more and more high-end, and he puts that in quotes, thankfully, sound bars being announced with price points well over $1,500. Do we think this is the way home theater is trending, where only the nerdiest of home theater fans will still buy AV receivers and individual speakers? Do we think these higher-priced sound bars are actually capable enough to maybe not deliver the sound quality of a full system, but genuinely capable of delivering great sound by virtue of costing more while offering much simpler setup and ease of use? Every report I've read of these high-end sound bars is giving me absolutely no confidence that they sound any better or that they're any easier to use. They do promise the moon. They promise a lot of HDMI, ARC, and eARC. Sure. They promise a lot of this stuff, but I just see more and more reports of people complaining about them not, still having to turn on the subtitles. People still, the Atmos was never very convincing to me. Of course it wasn't. It's all coming from one bar in the front. We didn't think was going to happen.
I mean, obviously, you have somewhat simplified the physical placement of at least your front 3 speakers, because there's just a bar and it's going either directly above or below your TV. So that is simplified. But no, I haven't come across any sound bars where, like I mentioned last week, where I was like, there's the Vizio 5.1.2 soundbar for $500 brand new, but you can definitely find it for $400. And for me, it's the only soundbar out there right now that I don't feel bad about buying, because everything that has cost less than that, I'm like, that just sounds like garbage, and I feel is a waste of money. And everything that costs more, I'm like, now we're into, you could, for the same amount of money, get something that sounds so much better than this that I don't feel good about spending $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 on this soundbar solution, when you could get some, Yamo S-series speakers and an entry-level AV receiver, and hopefully an RSL speedwoofer or something along those lines, or even just one of the Dayton sub 1200s or something like that, and still have something that sounds so much better than those $1,500 soundbars. So to me, the $400 soundbar that definitely sounds better than your speakers, and frankly sounds better than any sound individual speaker system you could put together for $400, because I don't even know where you'd find an AV receiver that's going to fit within that budget and leave you enough room for 5 speakers and a sub. So for $400, that Vizio soundbar to me hits the sweet spot of, it's definitely better than anything that costs less, but it doesn't cost so much that you could easily get something better for the same price. But that's me. That is the enthusiast. Unfortunately, I am seeing the low end of home theater. It feels to me like it's starting to slip away, because I'm seeing everything go higher and higher in price, right? The AV receiver prices are going up and up and up. We've seen those new, leaked, quote unquote, rumored prices from Denon and Marantz, and those prices are going up and up and up. The speaker prices, all the speakers I'm seeing, talked about on forums or just in posts or from the YouTube folks and that, it's all getting more and more expensive. And I think that kind of makes sense, because the crowd that got into this when they were, in their early 20s, 10, 15 years ago, they're all coming into making a bit more money now. Things are a little bit more stable. They're getting into their 40s, their 50s, and have a bit more disposable cash. It's that whole market of us YouTube generation people is like coming into that. Maybe we've got a bit more money to spend, and it seems like that's where a lot of the focus is going. So I'm a bit perturbed because I still want to have really high value, really good, affordable options for people to be able to afford, where I think really most of the value is. But I do sort of see the market shifting towards like, hey, if you want to get to the $1,000, $1,500 price point, I'm not really sure what your separate speaker and AV receiver options are, what you're going to be left with. Like, it's starting to look a little bit barren. We're not seeing a ton of stuff being introduced there, whereas we are seeing these soundbars come in. So if somebody is just researching on their own, I'm a little bit perturbed. I'm a little bit worried that they're going to be like, well, I guess I'm getting myself a flagship Samsung soundbar, which, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's better than your TV speakers for sure, but at $1,500 and up, I'm like, ugh, that's a lot of money for what I don't think the performance lives up to.
Well, I will stand by my article that is, I think I called it "Stop with the Atmos Soundbars," because the whole idea behind Atmos soundbars is just to shove $1.50 more worth of drivers into a normal soundbar, call it Atmos, pay for the licensing fee, and then charge 10, 20, 30, 50 times what you could charge on the same bar that only had 3 or 4 channels in it, or 3 channels in it, 2 or 3 channels in it, and was just called a soundbar. And doesn't really sound any better. So, yes, okay. This is, and I hear this all the time in this industry. I've been in here a long time, right? And this is cyclical. What happens is it all gets pushed to one side. It gets pushed very heavily towards tower speakers. It gets pushed very heavily towards bookshelf, very heavily towards in-ceiling speakers. Everybody wants everything to be in-ceiling for a while. And then right now we're on this soundbar kick, and they're like, hey, if you're going to pay $1,500 for a soundbar, I will 100% sell you a $1,500 soundbar. Like, I can make one cost $1,500.
You sure can.
Yeah, and that's what's happening right now. But you watch, give it a couple of years, enough people will get enough experience. And I heard this the other day when they're talking about electric vehicles. They're like, at about 5% market penetration. Once we start selling 5% to the electric vehicles to 5% of a population within an area, a country, a state, or whatever, then all of a sudden sales start to just shoot off. Right. They go up exponentially. It takes forever to get to 5%, but once you're at 5%, people know about it, and then they start wanting it or start talking about it. This is the same with soundbar sucking. Okay, when 5% of the people, and I'm not talking about you guys and gals who are listening to this podcast, I'm talking about regular people who don't know that Ultra HD Blu-ray exists. Once they start talking to each other and saying, I heard soundbars suck, that's when all of a sudden these things are going to disappear and people are going to start looking for something else. And the real problem has always been and will continue to be that home theater is complicated. It is hard for people to understand, which is why many of my articles on AV gadgets are just talking about why do we do things the way we do? Why does an AV receiver even have to have video? Why does it have to do video? All it's doing is audio. Why do we have to plug everything into that when I could plug it all into my TV? That, and then now that there's HDMI eARC and everything else, I definitely don't need to plug anything into an AV receiver, right? Why do I even need this thing? It's an informational thing, and home theater is complicated. And the selling point of soundbars is the lie that they sound as good as a full system, which they do not, and the lie that they are easy and very convenient. Both those things are lies. And once the public starts to understand that, then we'll see the whole conversation shift back towards something else that we'll think is stupid. Don't worry, we'll think it's stupid too. That's the whole thing, is that we'll think it's dumb because we know what you really need. And you don't think it's complicated, but I bet at one point you did. And you have to remember that's where everybody else is.
Alrighty. So
that's it. Who do we have left, Rob?
Yes, we have Nick, Leighton, with many pictures that I have to scroll by, Jeremy, also many pictures to scroll by, Mike, and Vasanth from India. So we're building up a little bit of a backlog here, but not to worry. We will continue on, and questions shall be answered.
That's right. We want to get to your question. So if you want to get it answered and get in our queue, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners in the week. We want to thank our 138 patrons over at patreon.com/avrantpodcast, including Jeremy and Michael. So thank you very much.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast, as Tom just said. That's the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 138 patrons over there. Jeremy and Michael, thank you for being two of them.
I also want to thank Ilango for sending a Amazon Canada gift card to Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Ilango.
And Gurinder, Bertrand, and Jeremy for sending me photos to use on AV gadgets.
Thank you, Gurinder, Bertrand, and Jeremy.
Lastly, we want to thank those of you who have thanked us for keeping this podcast going, even though we both had COVID at this point. We just kept powering through.
I'm very glad mine was as mild as I can imagine it being without it being truly 100% asymptomatic.
Did I lose? Did I skip a podcast when I had COVID? I feel like I didn't.
I can't remember at this point. I don't think you did, but
yeah, I don't think I did either. I think I just said I tested positive. If I sneeze, that's why, or cough, or whatever it was. So thank you. We got notes of gratitude from Gurinder, Ilango, Brandon, Aras, Bertrand, Michael, Jonathan, and Jeremy. Thank you for thanking us.
Yep, I'll say the names one more time. Gurinder, Ilango, Brandon, Aras, Bertrand, Michael, Jonathan, and Jeremy. Thank you all so much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us, for keeping the podcast going. We certainly appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.